Hey family, welcome back to my video. Today we will see, what if Harry Potter was deadly assassin? Before we start, I would like to extend my sincere thanks to the original author of this story for granting us permission to use it in our YouTube video. Your generosity is greatly appreciated. The author's creation and the original story's link in the descriptions. Please do check that first. Now enjoy the video. Chapter 1. Boy Who Lived Hogwarts, Great Hall, 1997. Welcome everyone to a new year at Hogwarts. The head of the school stated while standing at a podium and addressing the student body, not caring for the glares and scowls being aimed at them by various students and faculty alike. Similarly, they also weren't caring for the different individuals spread throughout the hall along the walls, a few of which were also glaring at them. They didn't care. They were too happy to care as decades of planning had finally paid off and their control was being solidified even now. These simpletons would either fall in line or be removed along with any other dissenters. They were sheep after all. They didn't know what they wanted. They had to be told what they wanted. The head would help maintain order within England through the school and the children while collecting any useful artifacts, individuals, and money, and the rest of their allies would fulfill their part in other parts of the world. Now, we shall of course do announcements and go over the curriculum changes. They continued with a smile, though anyone could see it was far from kind and understanding despite the head thinking otherwise. First, we have Dash. The person was cut off as the window behind the teacher's table suddenly shattered. What the devil? They shouted as they turned around, wand at the ready, just in time to see a hooded and armored figure leap off the teacher's table and was heading right for them. The main thing noticed was the long blade that was sticking out from below the figure's right wrist and was looking to impale the head teacher. Said head teacher tried to use their wand, but it was too late as the figure landed on top of them and the blade easily slipped into their throat as they stared into the glowing red eyes of the figure before them. The figure then twisted the blade and stood up glaring at the new corpse, requiescat in pace. The figure snarled in a dark and demonic voice before they spat on the corpse and turned their attention to the hall, seeing a majority of the people along the walls aiming their wands at them. You will pay for what you've done to Hadrian Potter. The figure growled as their eyes blazed with pure fury. The figure glared at all the people who were on their list of enemies, and to think a couple they once thought of as friends and allies. But no longer. They would pay for all that they had done in their quest for power and control, especially all that they had done to Potter. They couldn't help but remember how things had started. Number 4, Privet Drive, 1984. Ding dong. Petunia Dursley née Evans and her husband Vernon Dursley frowned as they set their cups of tea down, wondering who could be at the door at this time of day. Their sweet and innocent son, Dudley, was at a friend's house, and he wasn't going to be back until tomorrow. They weren't expecting any guests, and it wouldn't have anything to do with the freak. They shouldn't be bothered about that freakishness until he was at least 11, and by that time, they could perhaps beat it out of him. Petunia personally felt that if she wasn't worthy of magic, then it had to be some unnatural freakish thing, and her sister Spawn was most certainly not worthy of it. The fact her sister never even tried to share the magical world with her was another point of anger for her. Ding dong. Oh yes, the door. Pushing her cup away, she stood before smoothing her dress. After smacking the cupboard door and ordering the freak to be quiet, she went to the front door and opened it. Standing before her was an older white man with whitish hair that the light made it almost look blonde and had a trimmed goatee of the same color. He wore a nice black suit with emerald accents complete with a black trench coat. However, the thing that drew her attention was the ghostly blue left eye and the amber right eye that he had. She tensed at the look because she recalled that old freak coming to talk to her parents about her sister being a witch. Behind the man was a nice-looking German car, and 3 men were standing around it. At the driver's door, a bald white man wearing a nice black suit with a red tie and black leather gloves stood with his hands folded in front of him. He had blue eyes and an expressionless face, though his eyes had an intensity to them that almost made Petunia feel like he was glaring at her in hatred. The second man was also white, though he had black hair that reached halfway down his neck and was clearly a natural look. He had a scruffy beard, black eyes, and wore a suit too, though his was a simple black shirt and black tie. He looked indifferent towards her when he wasn't scanning the surrounding area, almost like he thought someone would attack at any moment. The third man was tan-skinned with a buzz cut on the back and sides of his head, and the hair on top being a bit messy and spiky. He wore pitch-black sunglasses, so there was no way of telling what color his eyes were. From what she could tell, he was wearing a black long, sleeved shirt under his trench coat with jeans and boots as well. All three were very well built and physically fit. There also seemed to be a fourth figure in the car, but she couldn't make out much beyond that they had a hood up over their head. "Good morning, madam. Are you perhaps Petunia Disley?" The man in front of her asked with a pleasant smile, and she bit back a gulp since she was outnumbered by possible freaks, and she was currently alone unless Vernon came to the door. She failed to notice the twitch of the man's eyes before she finally had enough courage to answer. "Why, yes. Who are you, and what do you want?" Petunia asked, and the man smiled reassuringly at her. "My name is Walter Grendeleg. I wish to speak to you about your nephew." The now named Walter introduced himself, causing Petunia to pale rapidly. "Vernon!" She screamed and backed up as her husband came rushing over to her. "What's wrong, pet?" Vernon asked before looking at the man at the door. "Hello, Mr. Disley. I am here to talk to you and your wife about your nephew," Walter stated, making Vernon widen his eyes. "We don't have a nephew," Vernon stated, not wanting any chance of people teaching the freak more freakishness. "I am speaking of one Harry Potter, Mr. Dursley. I know he was left here just under 3 years ago. There's not much point in lying, I'm afraid," Walter stated, making Vernon back up with Petunia behind him. "What do you want?" Vernon asked, wondering if he could close the door and get to his room to grab his shotgun. "The boy. I want him. I'm willing to take him off your hands, with you signing away any rights you have to him as his family, and I will compensate you for doing so." He spoke calmly as the two gaped at him. "What do you want with him?" Vernon couldn't help but ask. "Does it matter? He will be out of your lives, and you will be richer. Everyone will win," Walter explained, making the two look at each other. Docomain, Isus," Vernon stated as he stepped back and discreetly had Petunia go upstairs just in case. "Thank you," Walter stated before waving his fingers at his men, and the bald one opened the car and grabbed a briefcase before coming up to him and handing it over, and then walked back to the car. Vernon noted he had some weird marking in the back of his head, but honesty, he didn't care. Walter entered with the briefcase and sat down on the couch as Vernon sat opposite him with the coffee table between them. Walter then set the briefcase on the table and turned it to Vernon before opening it, showing stacks of money. "So, let's discuss the boy," Walter stated, a smile on his face, knowing that having the boy would give them the edge they had been looking for. He just needed this idiot muggle to sign the papers, and then he could leave with the boy and ensure he was as great as his bloodline said he could be. Hogwarts Headmaster's Office, August 1st, SD, 1991. Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, Supreme Mugwump of the International Confederation of Wizards, ICW, Chief Warlock of the Wisingamot, Defeater of Grindelwald, and Headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, had not had a good last 7 years. Why? Because he had lost Harry Bloody Potter, the boy who fucking lived. Dumbledore didn't know what happened. He had gone to a meeting for not even 3 hours, and then he got back and found his monitoring instruments had all shut down or exploded. Further, upon investigating Privet Drive, it was to discover it was completely empty. No sign of anyone living there, and no sign of Harry. Even worse, the blood wards he had erected had all but disintegrated beyond any hope of repair. Any and all plans he had for Harry were scrapped and thrown into a furnace after that. He had spent countless resources, counting finances and favors, to look for him without arousing suspicion, but it was for nothing. There was no trace of him or the Dursleys. If not for the fact his name was still written under the Hogwarts registry, Dumbledore would fear that the boy was dead. If that happened, then a whole host of problems would arise that Dumbledore did not want to deal with, but he did have plans ready for if he did need to deal with it. It didn't help his nerves that he had gotten 2 letters that made things harder for him. The first was that someone was suing him, as well as all the publication companies, writers, and distributors for The Boy Who Lived books he had commissioned to build up Harry as a light wizard savior that looked up to him in order to build up high expectations and some pressure for the boy, so he'd follow the path he needed to follow. Whoever it was, they were pulling out multiple issues and clauses to bring into the lawsuit, and it ended with Dumbledore losing all the money from the sales, the books being canceled and pulled from the stores, and everyone was forbidden to write about Harry unless there was a contract signed by him involved unless they wanted to be sued as well. It had completely undermined and ruined his attempt to gain financing and build up Harry's image in the way he wanted it to be built, as well as get people's expectations placed on Harry even faster. He couldn't even find the name of the lawyer involved as there was a gag order in place, as well as the fact the companies quickly settled to avoid too much loss should a trial come and they face the public and be found that their books were works of fiction without the boys' consent. They'd likely be ruined and wouldn't recover, so they settled and removed all the books. The second was a letter from Gringotts stating that the key to the Potter vaults he had was now useless, and that all of his possessions were screened before all that were Potter family property were reclaimed. Plus, money was taken from his vault to reimburse the Potters for loans and amounts he withdrew for the time that Harry had been at Privet Drive. Naturally, that had both shocked and pissed him off very quickly. Immediately checking his possessions, he found both the pensive and invisibility cloak he had taken from the Potters gone. The pensive was more annoying than important, but he was Albus Dumbledore. Why shouldn't he have his own pensive? And it wasn't like Harry was ever going to need it. No, what the problem was the invisibility cloak, as he was sure it was one of the hollows from the tale of the three brothers. He already had the wand. If he had the cloak, then all he had to do was find the stone, but the cloak wouldn't accept him, and it rejected any spells he tried to place on it, making him further believe it was the hollow, and as such was loyal to the Peveril line, which Harry was the last of. The plus side was that nothing involving Gringotts was made public knowledge, thus he wasn't going to take any hits politically or just publicity-wise from essentially stealing from one of the most ancient and noble houses of not just Britain, but of the magical world. While the money wasn't a huge problem, he could easily get more. The amount sitting in that vault gathering dust could be put to so many good uses. Not only knowledge, but gaining more allies for when Voldemort eventually returned and getting any supplies he may need for it. Plus, money talked and a great many people were willing to listen when it did. Votes, favors, allies, supplies, spies, information, knowledge, fear, respect, power. All of it could be gained with money, especially if you were skilled at using it. It only reminded him of the treasure trove of wealth, power, and knowledge that was likely stored within the primary Potter home. It had stood for ages, since the Potters came to England. Merlin knows how long ago. If only Albus, his deputy headmistress, Minerva McGonagall's cry broke him from his thoughts as he saw her storm into his office. Quickly taking a moment to push his frustrations and annoyances away, he looked at her in concern. "Minerva, what is it? What's wrong?" Dumbledore asked, wondering what could make her react in such a way. "Harry Potter?" she exclaimed, making him widen his eyes in shock as he jumped to his feet. "What? What has happened?" He all but demanded, not caring for decorum or control. He sent his Hogwarts letter back saying, "I don't need to go, so no thanks." Can you imagine that? What are people going to think when they learn that Harry Potter doesn't want to come to Hogwarts? Minerva shouted, while not believing the son of her two favorite students didn't want to attend Hogwarts. If she found out it was because of those damn creatures that Albus called his family were to blame, then Albus was going to be spending a couple weeks in the hospital wing. "Worry not, Minerva. I shall handle this personally. I'm sure a simple discussion with the boy will be enough to persuade him," Dumbledore stated as his mind began calculating and planning how to best approach Harry and deal with it. The boy needed to attend Hogwarts, so he could ensure Harry was prepared for stopping Voldemort, even if the boy had to die by the end of it. There was also ensuring the boy was a beacon of light for people to follow, so they didn't stray towards the dark or the so-called gray sides. Another reason for him to die later. Nothing got recruits and loyalty like a beloved martyr. "That's not a good idea, Albus," Minerva stated, drawing his attention back as he raised an eyebrow, especially as she glared. "You have a lot of explaining to do on why the bloody hell his address is in Knockturn Alley when you said he was left with his muggle relatives," Minerva shouted as she slammed the letter on the desk, showing the return address to the shocked headmaster. Hadrian Potter, crossed wands dueling in Knockturn Alley, London, England. Dumbledore was very shocked and worried at Harry living in Knockturn Alley. It was basically the dark wizard version of Diagon Alley. If word got out about him living there, people would start asking many questions that he never would want people to ask. However, he also saw Minerva's point on him going there not being a good idea. A political figure and light wizard like him going there would drum up rumors, accusations, drama, and openings for his opponents to exploit, especially if just why he was a nocturne came to light. No, he'd have to send someone else there to speak with Harry. Someone that either wouldn't be looked at twice for being there or their reputation was too solid with his backing to question. Now the question, after he dealt with a clearly irate Minerva, was who to send? Diagon Alley. Next day, Minerva was walking through the bustling street looking the picture of calm, collected, and professional, even if inside she was a wreck. She had been chosen to go talk to Harry Potter alongside her two colleagues Pomona Sprout, herbology professor and head of Hufflepuff House, and Phileas Flitwick, charms professor and head of Ravenclaw House. The reason for them three was that they were the most senior members after the headmaster, not counting Professor Ben since he'd been a ghost for centuries, and were nothing to sneeze at if trouble started. Herself and Sprout were skilled and experienced, witches while Flitwick was a former dueling champion. Reaching the main path to Nocturne Alley, McGonagall looked to her companions, making sure they were ready. Once they nodded, the three began descending the stairs to the primary area. However, where they'd usually expect a foggy/eerie atmosphere with many people that you'd go out of the way to avoid looking at you with interest, now they found a somewhat clearer area with only a few people here and there. Of course, McGonagall's enhanced senses from being an animagus let her know there were several hidden in the shadows watching them as they walked. However, all they did was watch, though a few quickly left, which made McGonagall assume they were going to report that they were there to someone. After a few minutes, they were stopped by 5 large men, all dressed the same. Black trousers, brown boots, green suspenders, white button-up shirts with the sleeves rolled up to the elbows, and silver bowler hats, while also having a pin of a stylized golden flaming pea within what looked like an arrowhead on a castle tower. All 5 cracked their knuckles as the trio of teachers prepared to draw their wands. "I wouldn't do that," a female voice stated, making them look to see a young girl walking out from a corner. "You 3 would be on your way to St. Mungo's before you could truly do some damage," she stated as she stood there letting them see her. She wore a pair of black boots, trousers, a brown belt with multiple pouches, a silver bracer on her left arm, a red shirt, and a black coat that reached the back of her knees and had a hood that she currently had up. "Why are you here?" "I think it would be prudent for Hogwarts professors to not come here," she asked as she looked at them. "We're here to see Mr. Hadrian Potter about attending Hogwarts," Flitwick stated, only for the large men to step forward aggressively. "That is Lord Potter to you 3, and I believe Harry has already informed you that he has no desire to attend. Now, rather than show proper decorum and etiquette by sending a letter requesting to come and talk to him, you just come here uninvited and expect him to talk to you? I see manners and proper procedure aren't taught in your school," the girl stated, making them wince since they were sent off in such a hurry. None of them had thought about common courtesy. The boy who lived was living in Nocturne Alley for Merlin's sake. That alone causes quite a bit of commotion. "We apologize. We were more concerned over the fact that he was living in Nocturne Alley and worried that he could have been forced to reject the invitation," McGonagall stated as the girl looked at her. "So instead of contacting the DMLE, your esteemed headmaster sends 3 of his teachers while not bothering to come himself?" she asked, making the 3 wince since that was also looking quite bad for them. "I see your master is more interested in protecting his image than if our Lord is actually all right," she stated, making the trio frown since that wasn't totally wrong. If word got out about this, Albus' reputation would take a grand hit, since he had assured many people that Harry was safe and protected, and him living in Nocturne Alley was not what anyone would consider to be safe and protected. Or at least, it wasn't, but clearly something had changed in the area. "My dear, please, we simply wish to speak to Mr. Lord Potter about his decision to attend the school. If he doesn't wish to attend the school after we talk to him, we will leave it at that," Sprout stated as the girl looked at her. "But will your master? He has already shown his disrespect and lack of caring for what my lord desires by sending you here rather than at least attempting to request an audience, as proper procedure dictates. Then rather than coming himself and owning up to his mistake, both in apparently losing track of my lord, not contacting the DMLE about losing him or about him living here, and not coming to face him himself. He sends your three professors and heads of house at that, all of whom could lose reputation by coming here if it was how it used to be. Meanwhile, his potions master comes here quite often to obtain ingredients, and yet he didn't send him. Most likely due to rivalry and bit of hatred between him and my lord's father, so your master didn't want to risk alienating him further. The girl stated, making the trio glance at each other at her being so well informed. Before any of them could comment, though, a raven flew towards them and landed on the girl's arm before giving her a note. The girl read it and frowned a moment. Seems my lord wishes to speak to you anyway. Follow me and keep up. If you get lost then, just go back to your school, she stated as she turned and started walking away with the 5 large men motioning them to get going, before 3 moved to flank them as they walked. Young lady, must you be so rude? McGonagall couldn't help but ask as they followed. You mean like showing up unannounced to convince a boy to go to your school because you're worried about appearances? She fired back, making McGonagall recoil a bit since she had a point. Respect is a two-way street, ma'am. You start showing it and then I'll consider doing so. I will be polite when you start being polite, she continued, and the 3 couldn't truly fault her for that. They were showing up unannounced, without invitation, and without clearance from anyone other than Dumbledore, who didn't have the authority to do that even as Chief Warlock. As they followed the girl through the winding paths, they noticed various children at play, people repairing old and decrepit houses, chatting, practicing spell work, reading various books, and seeming to have made happy lives out of here, despite the fact that hardly anyone within Nocturne was ever happy with how their lives went. Eventually, they came to what they assumed was an inn, but could easily be mistaken for a lavish estate. They saw various people dressed similarly to the 5 large men, standing about counting a few women. McGonagall and Flitwick couldn't help but draw comparisons to the old Ashwina gang that was in the Hogsmeade area 100 years ago. As they approached, a door at the top of some stairs burst open before a man was sent tumbling down before landing harshly on the ground. A young man walked out wearing a white collared shirt, black trench coat, dark green trousers, black boots, and fingerless black gloves and started walking down. You come here under the pretense of doing business in a civilized manner, and then try to make demands of our boss like he's some ignorant whelp? He shouted angrily as the man coughed and spat some blood on the ground as the other people in the area all stood straight and looked very pissed off. I didn't mean. The man started only to get kicked by the young man when he reached him. Get the fuck out of our sight. You'll find your business will be dried up within the month if you're lucky. I suggest you get out of the alley while you've still got working legs, the young man stated as 2 men came and grabbed him off the ground before dragging him away. I see negotiations went well, the girl stated as the young man looked at her. Fucker actually threw he could intimidate boss into giving up his claim to the area, he stated, making the girl scoff. Idiot. Anyway, I have the 3 owls of dumb whatever to see him, the girl stated, while the trio frowned at being called owls, but they were essentially acting as messengers so they couldn't complain. When the shoe fit, the young man looked at them with a frown. Their funeral, he muttered as he motioned to the stairs before he and the girl led them upstairs to the door. Remember your manners this time, the girl stated as the 3 teachers grimaced at the reminder. Knocking twice on the door, the girl waited 30 seconds before opening the door and entering with the 3 teachers and the young man entering before she followed and closed the door afterwards. Looking around the room, the 3 teachers could easily see it was an office combined with a bedroom, which was cordoned off by a partial wall, and saw a large ornate desk with papers and scrolls sprawled across it with some books too. A large plush chair was at the desk with a fireplace behind it, and not a flute-type one either, while arrayed across the walls were various weapons, artifacts, portraits, and items that the 3 teachers couldn't identify. 3 Hogwarts professors, counting the deputy headmistress, here to see you on behalf of their master, the girl announced, making the professors wonder who she was talking to. A sigh drew their attention to a corner where a large reading chair sat with a young man in it. All 3 teachers had to stop themselves from gasping as the young man looked much like his father, but there were clear signs of his mother and paternal grandparents in his face, as well given the emerald eyes, high cheekbones, and near-perfect complexion. He sat there wearing black pants with various different pockets, a belt with multiple pouches, black dragonhide boots, and an open three-button collared shirt with a pair of leather bracers on his wrists. How do we not notice him? The three teachers thought in shock, with Minerva wondering why he didn't have glasses as the young man stood, making them note that he was tall for his age at a solid 5 feet in height, and made his way to his desk before sitting in the chair there, and then leaned back and looked at the trio, who couldn't help but be reminded of his paternal grandfather when he was not happy with someone. What are you three doing here? I made it perfectly clear in my letter that I had no desire or intention of attending Hogwarts. Is your master that old and senile that he can't understand clear English? Why should I listen to anything you have to say? He asked in a clipped tone as the raven flew off of the girl's arm and landed on a stand near the desk staring at the trio. Lord Potter. We are McGonagall found herself cut off as Harry looked at her. I know who you are, Minerva Irene McGonagall. Sorted into Ravenclaw when she went to school, wife of the late Ignis Udoyle, Uckwart, aunt to 5 nieces and 4 nephews given to you by your brothers Malcolm and Robert, friend and confidant to Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore back to even before he was the Dada professor, deputy headmistress, Transfiguration professor, thereby continuing the unspoken tradition of the deputy head being the Transfiguration professor, and head of Gryffindor House. The latter being a bit of a muddied area and source of concern and dispute, since never has a deputy head been a head of house, as it could cause conflict and bias. He stated as the trio looked at him in shock as he turned his attention to Sprout. Pomona Agatha Sprout, sorted into Gryffindor when at school, botanist, lover of plants, though not to the degree of former herbology professor Mirabelle Garlick, routinely takes a trip to Japan and Greece for new tips and tricks on growing and maintaining rarer plants. Had 3 bothers that died in the war with old moldy shorts. Said war is also why she always carries some preserved quick growth seeds of some plants that are useful in combat. Professor of herbology for Hogwarts and head of Hufflepuff House. He continued before turning to Flitwick. Filius Augustus Flitwick, sorted into Slytherin when at school, charms enthusiast and foremost expert of the subject in Britain, charms professor, 1/8 goblin, head of Ravenclaw House, my mother's former mentor, and former 13-time dueling world champion with a penchant for charms in his duels, with 3 of those wins resulting in the death of his opponent, though that's to be expected at times when one participates in war duels. Harry stated, showing that he really did know them, perhaps more than someone like him should, or that they'd want him to know. Lord Potter, McGonagall was once again cut off. The fact he sent 3 heads of house plus his deputy, rather than come here himself, tells me that your master thought higher of his political standing than any moral or ethical feelings he had about my safety. The very fact he ensured his deputy and a dueling champion were sent means he knew how dangerous this place can be, and still he decided it was better to send you than to come himself. Shows both cowardice and stupidity, Harry stated as he just stared at the 3, who were quickly finding that they weren't as in control of the situation as they had believed when they first set out. Then there's not only the clear disrespect of not contacting me to try and arrange a meeting and instead showing up unannounced, but the audacity, lack of manners, and disrespect to show up and just assume I'd take the meeting with you just because your master desires it. You and your master's arrogance offends me, as well as your cowardice at you not even considering to report to or ask the DMLE for help before coming to Nocturne in case I was being held against my will. No doubt trying to protect your master's public image, since losing the savior of the wizarding world would not look good on him, especially if the other members of the ICW got wind that he didn't inform anyone about this, or the fact he had no idea if I was still in England or not, Harry stated as the boy and girl just smirked at the 3. So again, I will ask and do not attempt to do anything other than answer the question. Why should I listen to anything you have to say? He finished as he stared hard at the 3. The 3 tried to form a coherent thought, having not expected to be picked apart by a boy not even in his first year at Hogwarts. Flitwick, always having to think on his feet and be ready for anything as a duelist and a Slytherin, was able to recover first. I will be blunt and to the point then, Lord Potter, he stated, drawing attention to himself as he held himself steady and calm, though Harry could easily see he was ready to move and attack at a moment's notice, meaning his warrior mentality and training hadn't dulled. A point in his favor in Harry's opinion, especially since his moniker, the snake that learned to fly, seemed to fit him well. Harry nodded to him, and he spoke, The last time a child didn't attend Hogwarts and didn't receive formal training from someone to get a full breadth of knowledge and training, as well as in a place that could absorb ambient magic to ensure no accidental magic took place. A city block was leveled or more accurately imploded. It is dangerous for a child, especially when puberty hits and they become hormonal, to be in an area that doesn't absorb ambient magic because it can lash out violently and in ways that are near unpredictable. I won't say that it hasn't at times proven useful, as a few everyday and useful spells were created by witnessing and trying to recreate their effects. Anyway, Hogwarts has a ward scheme so advanced and intricate as well as ancient that many warders, curse breakers, and rune masters still come by during the summer to study it and learn more about it in hopes of one day duplicating it. One such part of the ward scheme is that it draws away errant and accidental magic to fuel the wards and house elves that work there, and it creates a tap for that, so it drains away a portion of the person's magic to make accidental magic less likely to happen in the summer, with the amount weakening as the magical core of the individual matures to make it harder for accidental magic to occur unless severe emotional outbursts occur. However, Flitwick explained, but had to add as he looked at the boy before him, and he only felt he could call him a boy because he was only 11 years old. His stance, the way he moved from chair to chair, the way he held himself, the way he never removed his eyes from them for longer than absolutely necessary, and the aura around him all spoke of someone older, experienced, and battle-hardened. It reminded Flitwick of his old dueling mentor, a man who had survived a few wars, civil wars, and skirmishes in different continents and threats, and learned from each mistake, loss, victory, and fight. I can tell by the way you hold yourself that it may not be necessary for you. Your magical core and aura around you is more experienced and seasoned than one would typically see. I guess you're capable of some spells with or without a wand, though possibly not that advanced. Flitwick stated, using his analytical and tactical mind here. Harry snorted at that before, with a wave of his hand, a few papers on his desk floated, shocking Sprout and McGonagall, before he lowered them back to the desk. Yes, so what else do you have as an argument? Harry challenged, essentially all, but completely disregarding the two witches who didn't seem able to keep up with things as well as Flitwick. There's also the fact that Hogwarts is considered among the top 4 schools in the world, if not the top school. Having graduated from there would advance any career aspirations you may have for the future, and if you seek further education at one of the few advanced schools, graduating Hogwarts would increase that likelihood. Flitwick stated, but he knew that was a flimsy reason at best, especially since standard of education at Hogwarts had decreased a bit, and he wasn't foolish to blame it solely on Severus Snape, the potions teacher, as he had cleaned his act up a little under a decade ago. He was strict but much fairer than he was before, and the potion newt and OWL scores were climbing again. However, Severus was only one part of the problem. What were once mandatory courses were now electives, and much of what was great in various material was trimmed/dumbed down, increasing graduation numbers, but not giving any impressive graduates. Lily Evans, James Potter, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, Bellatrix Lestrange, Andromeda Tonks, Narcissa Malfoy, Severus Snape, Alice Longbottom, Frank Longbottom, Gideon Pruitt, Fabian Pruitt, Amelia Bones, and Edgar Bones were the last truly exemplary batch of students that Flitwick had had the privilege to teach and mentor. Those that followed showed promise in areas, but none had the drive, thirst, and desire to go beyond what was required to pass a class. The scores following that only continued to drop, both from the war wiping out so many families as well as people leaving Britain for greener pastures. In any case, it was also clear to him that the young man before him was in charge of at least a good portion of Nocturne Alley, or had a good amount of authority within some branch of the controlling interest. The alley was too clean, too safe to walk, and the area was protected by people that were following his orders and were angered by anyone insulting him. I intend to continue my business here, as well as expanding into other areas both within the alley and through Gringotts, preparing investments and future projects for me. Harry stated, since the goblins were actually friendly when you knew how to show them respect and get their respect. It was always good to make good impressions on business partners and clients after all. Flitwick nodded, already having guessed that part since there were numerous ways to make money in Nocturne. And the ways had only increased in the past few years due to the DMLE being underfunded and understaffed after the war, thus certain areas like Nocturne fell through the holes to not be touched unless absolutely necessary. He wasn't naive enough to believe that the young man before them wasn't engaging in some illegal activities, but he also wasn't going to jump the gun and think the boy was dark or a hardened criminal that should be sent to Azkaban. No, Flitwick himself couldn't claim to have never done something that at the very least skirted the law. Such was the real world, unlike the pretty fairy tale that the Ministry and Albus painted for people to believe in. Then I can only think of one primary item besides the fact many of your family went to that school. Flitwick stated, and wasn't surprised at the lack of reaction from the young man at the mention of his family attending Hogwarts. The young man obviously wanted to be practical rather than emotional in making his decision. The Ministry passed a law that states that any heir or heiress must attend Hogwarts to maintain their house seats on the Wisengamot. During the war, there was a bit of an exodus with few returning after it ended, and thus the Wisengamot thought it best to ensure that any families wishing to keep their seats had to have their children attend a school within magical Britain. Flitwick stated uncaring that his two fellow staff members just seemed to be stuck at the moment. I am aware of said law. I also know that it applies to the children of any ranking ministry officials as well as a few others in notable positions. Curious, though, that said positions are currently filled by people who have no children to send. Harry stated as Flitwick snorted, having come to the same conclusion already. It was just a power move to try and control the various houses that were part of the political field. However, I also know that it was your master that gave the idea and was one of the strongest supporters for it, as well as the one who came up with the secondary clauses of that law. Harry asked, making Flitwick frown, as he wasn't aware of a secondary part. I'm afraid I'll have to ask you elaborate, please, Lord Potter, as I know nothing about a secondary clause of that law. Flitwick requested after seeing the confusion on Minerva and Pomona's faces. Clause 1. Upon accepting/agreeing to attend Hogwarts, the student will be required to attend no less than 4 years of the school before being able to consider other schooling. However, if they intend to take their place as head of house and their seat in the Wisengamot, then they must attend the full 7 years or pay a series of fines, tolls, and taxes, all of which shall be distributed as needed to appropriate offices, including the chief warlock and minister. Harry stated, making the trio widen their eyes in shock. Clause 2. Any heir or heiress that doesn't attend Hogwarts will have to pay half of their total wealth and holdings to the Wisengamot, and up to 85% if they wish to still maintain their seats in the Wisengamot. Harry recited as the three were stuck in shock. There's also the law that states any house that no longer has an heir or heiress can have their holdings stripped and used by the ministry for whatever they wish. Would you like to take a guess on who allocates and receives money or other valuable items should such a thing happen in either case? Harry asked as the three sat there in shock. However, Harry could also see there was rage starting to boil in there as well and decided to add fuel to the fire. Funny how those laws and clauses were passed within 6 months of my leaving the Dursleys, isn't it? Harry stated, making it plain that he thought Dumbledore, at least, though he likely got several greedy members to join in happily, was preparing his setup to either force Harry to join Hogwarts or to gain from the Potter family in some way. It had the desired effect of McGonagall and Flitwick narrowing their eyes and looking both murderous and calculating, while Sprout was looking thoughtful and upset as well. You don't have to take my word for it, of course. You can easily look up the ministry laws and clauses yourself and ask your master to his face, and see if he can convince you about his reasons and the greater good the laws will serve. Harry stated at last as he sat back and sighed a bit. So if that is all true, why did you reject the acceptance to Hogwarts? Sprout asked, making the other two look at him. First, because I wanted to see what the old fool would do. Second, I consider it possibly being worth it in the fact I can tell anyone and everyone I please that I left due to unfair treatment created and directed at me by Dumbledore, as well as the fact he kept it quiet that he had no idea where I was, let alone if I had been kidnapped or left Britain on my own. Such backlash would be worth it even at the cost of money, since they'd only be able to take what Gringotts says I have to be taken, since like most of the older families, we kept places out of public record should we need to, shall we say, abandon the government. Harry stated as he eyed the trio. So there's nothing we could do to convince you. You've yet to decide which course would be better for you. McGonagall stated. still comprehending that this meeting was not going how she thought it would. Correct, so not only was your appearance rude, disrespectful, and arrogant, it was also quite pointless and useless. Harry stated as he sat back and grabbed a document. Now I'm sure Evie and Jacob will be kind enough to escort you out of the alley as, regrettably, there are still several areas that wouldn't be ideal for traveling in unless you had a big enough group or aura not to be fucked with. Harry stated, motioning to the two that were still standing behind the trio before he promptly turned to the paper. Lord Potter, I must protest. You remaining here is McGonagall was cut off again by a hard stare from Harry. None of your concern. You are not my guardian. You have no relation to me. And even if I was to attend your school, you have no say in any decision I make in my life, let alone where I choose to live. This is my home, and I see no reason to leave or relocate, and you would do well to keep in mind your limits, place, and what proper decorum is. You're a teacher and deputy headmistress. Know your role and your limits before you end up offending the wrong person, since your master will only protect you so long as it serves him to do so. Harry stated neutrally as he stared at her. Now, I've been kind enough to host you in my home despite the fact you showed up unannounced and had the audacity to just assume I'd take the meeting. Do not take my hospitality for granted and leave now. He ordered as Flitwick stood and nodded to Sprout, causing her to nod before they guided McGonagall, who was still in a state of shock, out the door with Jacob and Evie following them to make sure they actually left the area. Harry then stood and moved by one of the windows watching the three leave with Jacob, Evie, and a few of the crew going as escorts. That old fool is looking desperate if he sent three of the heads and teachers to talk to you. A dark and demonic voice stated, making Harry glance to his right and see a robed and armored figure standing near him, looking out the same window, while they had a hood up over their head, hiding their face except for the red eyes they possessed. So, it would seem, not that it matters, I fully intended to go to Hogwarts, but doing it this way gets me more out there while making Dumbles more paranoid about things. Plus, those three were affected by what they've seen, and I want that to start too so I can build my power base in other areas as well. When I eventually show up at the Wisegamot, I'll use this and a couple other things to poke more holes into Dumbledore's light wizard of a grandfather appearance and break his holdings even more. Harry stated as the figure chuckled. Good to see you've been learning and paying attention. I'll keep my own eyes and ears open as well as I'm out and about. The figure stated, making Harry nod. You do that. I still need to finish some work before it's time to leave for Hogwarts, or I'll be back for a headache. Harry stated, causing the figure to shrug. You do that. I'll be hunting tonight, by the way. The figure stated, and Harry sighed. Fine, just be careful and don't overdo it. Last thing I want is the DMLE having to snoop around here. Harry stated, making the figure turn their head at him. You're the one always preaching about being careful and never getting complacent in one's skills. Harry commented, knowing the figure likely took the first part as an insult. I know. Still surprising that you listen, though. The figure stated, making Harry roll his eyes. Just get out of here. I have to get back to planning and work. Harry stated, making the figure grunt before they vanished, and Harry walked back to his desk to keep looking over his paperwork and plans. Master, would you like some tea? A female voice asked, making him look at his personal maid. She stood with violet hair that reached her mid-back, pink eyes, heart-shaped face, DD-cup breasts, a plump ass, wide hips, fit body, and it was shown off via her strapless leotard-style made outfit, complete with black stockings with white frills that went to just under her ass, black high heels, black cuffs with white frills, a maid cap, and a black choker with white frills that had a gold flaming P emblazoned on it. Naturally, she also had a tea tray in hand. Thank you, my dear, Harry stated kindly as she smiled and walked forward before pouring him some tea, not even reacting to his hand caressing her thigh and ass besides smiling at him. I am happy to serve, master, she stated with a loving smile as she stood up straight. Will there be anything else? She asked while sticking her chest out. Harry merely smirked. No, not right now. I need to focus on work for now. Come back in a little while, and I'm sure I'll have something for you to do, he instructed, making her smile as she licked her lips. Of course, sir, she stated as he walked off, letting her ass bounce and sway with her hips as she walked. Harry just smirked and went back to his work before a pop sounding near him, and he turned to see an old-looking house elf there holding some letters. "Deke is bringing your mail, Master Harry." The now named Deke stated, making Harry smile in appreciation as he took the mail. "Thank you, Deke," Harry stated, making Deke smile in appreciation before he disappeared with another pop. September 1st, St. King's Cross Station. Harry moved calmly and swiftly through the crowd of people while having a hood over his face, making him just look like a kid heading for a train not worth paying attention to. He knew he was being flanked to the far sides as he moved, but they were his people doing so, thus he had no issue with being followed. He did smirk at the sight of a few of Dumble's own pawns and supporters there, though Harry had long since mastered blending into crowds, and if there was a chance they'd notice him, his people would handle it, non-lethally at that. He rolled his eyes as he passed a red-haired woman talking loudly about muggles. Clearly she was also one of Dumbledore's people, or was just very stupid, since it wasn't uncommon for an Auror of the DMLE to be at the station just to ensure things were going smoothly. It was sadder, in Harry's opinion, that the last of the Pruitt family was satisfied being a housewife and mother, and not even training her children to be the fighters that the Pruitts were known to be. Going through the column to get to platform 9 3/4, Harry smiled at the sight of the Hogwarts Express and headed for it to get a compartment, though he did accidentally brush against a few people that he knew were on his shit list that were at the station, counting one blonde asshole and his no doubt equally asshole son. He didn't need the money he had swiped from them, but he could put it to much better use than they could. Plus, the funny bit of them trying desperately to figure out when they had either lost the money or when someone had managed to steal it. Harry boarded the train and quickly had his clothes changed to trousers, boots, long-sleeve shirt, and vest which were primarily black with emerald and ruby accents. The clothes weren't overly expensive looking, but they weren't cheap either. He glanced around at some of the compartments before he found one and took his seat to relax with one of the few books he wanted to review as he waited for his companions to catch up. A few minutes later, the door opened before it closed and two people sat in the compartment, revealing a girl and a boy. The girl sat with braided hair, wearing a white long-sleeved shirt, black bodice, black-heeled boots, gray pants with metal studs, gray fingerless gloves, and a simple black cord necklace with what looked like a crystal in it. The boy had a short, matted hairstyle and was wearing a white Henley shirt with the buttons undone, brown trousers, black boots, and a full-length black glove on his left hand and a fingerless one on his right hand. "All right," Harry asked as he turned a page in his book. "None of the kids we saw in any compartments look up to snuff. Hell, even the prefects we saw could be taken down within a couple minutes." The boy stated as Harry nodded. None of the adults of the station were worth mentioning either. Some pretty females, but no one was sensory aware or really giving off a danger sense. The blonde woman with a black streak at least had a somewhat subdued aura, more like she was looking for long distance or obvious threats rather than the possible up close. The girl stated as Harry nodded again. "Remind me to increase your situational awareness training," he stated absently, making the two blink. You missed the semi-crippled old man, standing exactly 22 feet from the entrance to the platform under a low-grade, notice me not charm. Strong enough for anyone not trying to look, but not for those who were being more aware of their surroundings. Harry stated, making the two frown at that information. 22 feet. The boy asked and Harry turned a page. The maximum distance a fit attacker can get to someone while wielding a melee weapon is 21 feet. They can cover that space in the time it takes the average wizard to draw their wand, raise it, and then fire a spell. Inside 21 feet, the attacker wins 99% of the time. Outside of it, they have the options of negotiating, not attacking, retreating, or running for cover. The man you two failed to notice is Alastair Mad-Eye Moody, the head Auror for 3 decades and one of the most brutal fighters in the Ministry's army, as well as one of Dumbledore's most trusted confidants and friends. He's known to be barking mad, paranoid, and lethal in any fight he's in. He primarily trains the Auror recruits to get them up to wartime standards, though the Ministry has been decreasing funding, making his job harder, and the fact that the war decreased their numbers in multiple ways also didn't help things. He's also one of the few that didn't attempt to spy on us after the 3 professors were sent away. Harry explained as he turned another page, making the two look at each other in silent agreement that they needed to do better. The two then looked at the door as it was suddenly opened. "Have you seen Harry Potter? He's supposed to be on this train." The younger blonde asshole that Harry had swiped money from asked while 2 burly-looking boys stood protectively behind him. The two glanced at Harry, then at each other. Nope, haven't seen a Harry Potter. Heard of him. Yet to see him, though. The girl stated as the boy shrugged and left. They had decent clothing, even if it wasn't robes, so no reason to look down on them too much. Well, he's on the shit list right now. The boy in the compartment stated, making the girl nod while Harry hummed. A few minutes later had a pair of girls arriving at the door. Oh, do you mind if we sit here? One, a redhead with a couple freckles, asked with her blonde friend standing by her. Not at all, go ahead. The girl in the compartment stated, making the redhead smile in appreciation, before Harry idly flicked his hand, and their trunks levitated up onto the rack, shocking the two arrivals. You can do wandless? The redhead gasped in shock as Harry shrugged and turned the next page of his book. Get used to it. If we're in the same class, you'll be getting a lot of surprises from him. The girl that was there stated as she leaned back, and those raised in such a way could see her sitting like a perfect pureblood. Oh, where are my manners? I'm Susan Bones, and this is Hannah Abbott. The redhead informed as the blonde nodded in greeting. My name is Evie Fry. This is my brother Jacob, and that's Lord Hadrian. The now named Evie stated as she motioned to the other two. You're a lord? Susan asked in surprise as Harry nodded. Which house? She couldn't help but ask, and Harry was silent as he flipped the page. If you don't mind waiting, you'll find out at the sorting. I don't need too many people learning beforehand. Harry stated as he kept reading idly. Don't mind him, he's just not a fan of people gossiping and the like when they see him. Evie stated as the two frowned before Susan widened her eyes. You're Potter, she stated while trying not to shout, causing Hannah to look at him in shock. Harry sighed and nodded. Yes, I am, he stated as he kept his book up. Before anyone could comment, the door opened again, making Harry sigh at people lacking manners to knock on the bloody door. This time there were 3 girls and a boy there. The girls were white-skinned, with 2 having blonde hair, just different shades, and 1 having black hair and looked to be first years. 2 had blue eyes, and 1 had brown eyes, though one of the blue eyes had glasses on as well. The boy was dark-skinned with black hair and hazel eyes. The 4 quickly entered and closed the blinds before waiting, not noticing Harry wave his hand at the door as footsteps passed, making them sigh in relief. Sorry about that. We were just trying to avoid a prick and his 2 meatheads before they could cause us problems. The black-haired girl apologized with a sigh as she looked at the people there. Let me guess. About 4 feet 4 inches, heavily gelled blonde hair, skinny frame, expensive robes, shit brown eyes, higher than thou aura, a little annoyed and or pissed off, kinda looks like a ferret? Harry asked as he flicked a page again. The 4 blinked before nodding. Yes, actually. The taller blonde of the 2, being about 2 inches taller than her fellow blonde, there stated as she blinked her blue eyes at him. Harry merely hummed. Well, you have my sympathies for being subject to his bigotry, his stupidity, his greed and ambition combined with his advances, and for having to share blood with him, respectfully. Harry stated as he flipped the page, making the entire cabin look at him in confusion. I'm sorry, the black-haired girl asked. That was Draco Malfoy, heir to the Malfoy family and son of Lucius Malfoy and Narcissa Malfoy née Black. You, heiress Greengrass, are the target of his greed, ambition, and advances, since even at 11 you're showing how attractive you'll be in a few years. And he wants your family's status and money, as well as control any houses that swore fealty to yours. Your friend Tracy Davis, the taller blonde with glasses, is the subject of his bigotry for both being a half-blood and for belonging to what is classified as a sub-family, even though they have their own political and financial muscle for themselves. Your other friend, Blaise Zabini, is having to suffer Draco's stupidity, because if they aren't under his control, he doesn't want any males near you at all. Never mind the fact you 2 have been friends for years and have a near brother and sister relationship than anything close to romantic. Finally, your last friend, Isabella Malfoy, has to deal with being the idiot's better-looking twin sister, and thus has my pity for having to be related to him. Harry stated matter-of-factly as he finally looked at the group as they just stared at him in surprise. How did you know all of that? Isabella asked, and Harry glanced at her. I make it a point to know everything I can about everything I can, counting notable families and their heirs who I may have to coexist with for the next 7 school years. Harry stated before looking to Susan and Hannah, and yes, That means I knew who you were, Heiress Bones. Harry stated as he went back to his book and turned the page again. Greengrass frowned as she looked at him. The fact he addressed her as heiress, but not Tracy, meant that he belonged to a house that was higher than her friends and yet was likely equal or greater to her own, as he would have bowed in greeting. Only a handful of houses reached that level, and only one was supposed to have a green-eyed, black-haired male as an heir. Looking at his hand, both confirmed and one-upped her suspicions as sitting on Harry's right ring finger was a platinum ring with a blood diamond atop it, and then a stylized flaming pea that looked to be made of emerald. A ring far too grand for an heir, meaning only one thing. A pleasure to meet you, Lord Potter. Allow me to formally introduce myself. I am Daphne Elizabeth Greengrass, heiress to House Greengrass and first year waiting to be sorted. The now named Daphne stated as she gave a light curtsy, more respectful than submissive, and Harry closed his book and bowed his head lightly before offering his hand, and Daphne took it, allowing him to lightly kiss her knuckles. Charmed, my lady, Hadrian Artorius Potter, Lord of House Potter and heir to House Black, first year waiting to be sorted. Harry introduced, though his name was longer for different reasons, but unlike a certain old goat, an actual goat, not the acronym, he didn't need to flaunt his name constantly. I am Blaise Leonardo Zabini, heir to House Zabini, first year waiting to be sorted. Blaise stated, getting over the shock of the boy who lived being in front of him, as he gave a bow to Harry, who returned it before they gave each other a firm handshake. A pleasure, heir Zabini, Harry stated as Susan suddenly stood and curtsied. Apologies, Lord Potter. I am Susan Marguerite Bones, heiress of House Bones, first year waiting to be sorted. Susan stated, knowing she had forgotten proper etiquette when it came to houses and such. Be at ease, my lady. It is a pleasure to meet you as well. Harry stated as he took her hand and kissed it lightly, showing there was no offense taken. Tracy Marjorie Davis, heiress to House Davis, first year waiting to be sorted. Tracy stated, giving a grander curtsy than Susan or Daphne did, mainly due to the distinction of their houses. Mainly, Tracy's house was a noble house, meaning its history could be traced back to at least 500 years. House Greengrass was a medieval house traced to at least 800 years. House Bones, however, had the distinction of being a founding house, meaning it could be traced to at least 1,200 years. House Potter, though, was classified as an ancient house, meaning it could trace its prominence back at least 2,000 years, though many speculated it went back much further than that, but no one knew how far exactly. Many believed they could even be a most ancient house, meaning the roots could be traced back no less than 3,000 years. The last confirmed of those was wiped out in the war with Voldemort. As such, Harry was technically of a much higher rank than she was, and it would not do to be disrespectful when they were formally introducing themselves. This was especially true since her house was a sub or servant house that had sworn fealty to another house and would provide aid, money, and help in any situation their head house needed in return for protection for their own house from larger threats. It was even more important for her to show respect from the pure blood's point of view, as he was a former Sacred 30 family member. The Sacred 30 being the longest-running pure-blooded families left in England, which Harry's family was removed from when his father married a Muggle-born witch. A pleasure, Harry stated, dipping his head enough for proper decorum and giving a kiss to her hand as well. Hannah Lila Abbott, heiress of House Abbott, first year to be sorted. Hannah stated, giving the same curtsy as Tracy. A pleasure, Harry stated, giving the same treatment he had to Tracy. Isabella Louise Malfoy, daughter of House Malfoy, and first year to be sorted. Isabella introduced, taking a curtsy that was deeper than Daphne's, but lighter than Hannah and Tracy's. A pleasure to meet you, miss, Harry stated as he gave a kiss to her hand as well. These are my friends, Jacob and Evie Fry, he stated as the two nodded to them. You're welcome to take a seat if you want. Draco won't be able to find you here, Harry stated as he turned back to his book. Thank you, but we still need our trunks, and the compartment isn't dash. Daphne was cut off as Harry pulled his wand and tapped it on the luggage rack 3 times, causing the compartment to expand along with the luggage rack, and the 4 saw their trunks there, causing them to gape in shock. Always amazes me how people who grew up with magic can still find themselves shocked by it. Harry stated as he turned the page in his book again. Daphne recovered first and quickly took a seat with the other three quickly sitting down as well. Harry merely turned the page in his book before Isabella decided she had a question she needed to ask. How are you the heir to House Black? Isabella asked, knowing her brother had been bragging for a long time about being the heir. I have two connections to House Black within the last 3 generations. My great-grandmother was named Darla Black, and she married my great-grandfather Octavius Potter. She was a mainline member, thus I have claim that way. However, my claim supersedes your brother's and therefore yours by the fact my godfather was, and still is, Sirius Black. Harry stated, making those that weren't with him originally widen their eyes. But isn't he in Azkaban and exiled from the Black family? Isabella asked in shock, knowing about her mother's cousin. Azkaban, yes. Exiled, no. His mother wanted to, but her father-in-law was Lord Black and refused to do it since her complaint was that he went to Gryffindor and didn't want to become a Death Eater. Arturus Black was many things, but he always kept in mind how to ensure the family survival, so while most of the family was siding with the dark asshole, he let Sirius side with the light-sided group to fight to ensure he had family on both sides of the conflict to increase likelihood of survival, while knowing that there was family blood still flowing in the Potter family. As such, when he, his son, his daughter-in-law, and youngest grandson died, Sirius became heir and Lord Black, and as I'm his godson, that makes me next in line to be Lord Black than your brother. Harry explained as he turned a page, and the others blinked at his casual cursing. Before any of them could comment, the door opened again, making Harry sigh. What is with people not having manners to at least knock before they open the door to a compartment? Harry groaned, out making a few in the compartment and a few at the door flinch and look embarrassed. Sorry, I just wanted to ask if you'd seen my toad? A somewhat fat boy with blonde hair asked at the door. No, but one of the prefects or one of the heads should be able to summon him for you, or at least find him with a point me spell. If he keeps running away, I'd suggest getting a teacher to place a tracking charm on him so you can find him easily. Harry suggested, making the boy nod and smile in thanks before he bowed a bit and walked off, clearly knowing Harry was a lord but didn't have time to formally introduce himself. You're Harry Potter, a red-haired boy exclaimed in surprise and excitement as he looked at Harry. Would you believe I'm not? Harry asked dryly, hoping the boy would say yes. Do you really have the scar? He asked tactlessly, making Harry sigh, while the others looked at him in disbelief or annoyance, and the redhead girl next to him groaned and palmed her face. What scar? Harry asked calmly as he turned another page in his book. You know, the lightning scar on your forehead from surviving you. No, he stated, nearly shouting again. Never had that, sorry. I do have a scar on my forehead, but it's not a lightning-shaped one, nor did I get it from the Dark Wanker. Harry stated as he raised his hair off his forehead, showing a scar that seemed to be a 3-armed pinwheel, but blocky. What happened? One of the girls next to the red-haired boy asked. She had brown bushy hair. Something I'd rather forget. Also, you could introduce yourself. Harry stated idly as he let his hair go. Oh, I'm Hermione Granger, Muggle-born first year, waiting to be sorted. The now named Hermione stated, making sure to nod her head to all the occupants, though before she could start rambling, the boy next to her spoke up. I'm Ron Weasley, and this is my sister Ginny. The now named Ron stated as he motioned to the red-haired girl next to him, and he only looked at Harry. Ginevra Agatha Weasley, only daughter of House Weasley, and first year to be sorted. Ginny stated as she gave a curtsy to Harry, almost touching the ground with her knee, since she had seen the ring on his hand, unlike her brother, and then dipped her head to the others. Why did you curtsy to him? Hermione asked, wondering if Ginny was just overly proper like that. He's a lord of a highly esteemed house. My family is lesser ranked than his. It would be terrible manners to not show proper respect for his position and title. Ginny stated calmly, knowing Hermione likely wouldn't know about wizarding politics and etiquette. Isn't that a bit archaic? Hermione asked, trying not to sound rude. No more than the Muggles' way of doing things in England. When the Queen dies, her family will still hold the throne. Same with the different dukes, barons, earls, and such. Main difference is that we elect the 2 people that are the primary leadership positions. Houses primarily have voting power, as well as being able to push different motions and issues more than a normal person can. It's no different than a person lobbying for a politician or a rich person to back their cause, or claim thus giving them more weight and muscle to use. Plus, those who have a knighthood from the monarchy are technically a slightly higher status to the everyday citizen. Harry explained as he turned another page, making Susan and Hannah wonder how long that book actually was if he hadn't finished it by this point. Hermione blinked and nodded, seeing what he meant before she noticed the book he was holding. However, Ron spoke before she could say anything. "Do you mind if we sit in here?" he asked, already stepping in slightly before he was stopped by Jacob. "First, you're being rude to everyone else you didn't bother acknowledging. Second, you're being rude by just barging in here before anyone has said anything. Third, you're being rude by thinking that if Harry gives the okay, we'd all accept you being in here. Your arrogance and lack of manners is grating and annoying," he stated flatly as the majority of the compartment nodded, Susan and Isabella being the only ones not to, as they didn't want to start an altercation. "And who are you?" Ron asked, frowning at him while giving a look that said he was already hating him. "Jacob Fry." Jacob nearly growled at him. "With him and myself is Jacob's sister Evie, Susan Bones, Hannah Abbott, Daphne Greengrass, Blaise Zabini, Tracy Davis, and Isabella Malfoy," Harry stated, knowing that he had to step in before Jacob killed the idiot. "It worked too," as Ron jumped back in shock. "Your families are Slytherins," Ron shouted, acting as if they had just admitted to killing children in front of him. "Yes, is that a problem?" Daphne asked with an icy glare. "Yes, it's a problem. Everyone knows Slytherins are evil and nothing but dark wizards and witches. You should avoid them, Harry. They're likely plotting to either turn you or kill you," Ron shouted, drawing attention from the other compartments. Daphne glowered at him, but someone else beat her to the punch in addressing him. "First, I don't recall giving you permission to use the shortened version of my name. Second, if you're implying that all Slytherins are evil, then you're going to be facing a bit of a problem, since quite a few members of my family have been Slytherins. And I see no reason why I can't be friends with these four," Harry stated calmly to Ron while not even looking at him, while Evie and Jacob were still trying not to laugh at the idea of someone getting the drop on Harry. "But they're Slytherins. They followed you-know-who in the war," Ron nearly shouted, drawing more attention to them as his sister was face-palming hard in embarrassment. Except it wasn't only Slytherins that supported him, evidenced by Sirius Black being a Gryffindor, Barty Crouch Jr. being a Ravenclaw, Walden McNair was a Gryffindor, Augustus Rookwood was a Hufflepuff, and there were others, since he had a couple hundred followers at least, and there was no reason for him only pull from Slytherin, since talent is useful no matter what house you're placed in. Harry countered as the others looked at him in surprise. 4 other instances of the house not matching what you would become in life. There's Dumbledore, as he was a Ravenclaw, not a Gryffindor. Professor McGonagall was a Ravenclaw. Professor Sprout was a Gryffindor. Professor Flitwick was a Slytherin. Professor Sinistra was a Slytherin. Professor Babbling was a Ravenclaw. Your uncles were Hufflepuffs and were 2 of the fiercest duelists seen in years. An Auror named Alastor Moody was a Slytherin, and he is a close friend of Dumbledore's. Your ancestor Matilda Weasley was a Slytherin in her time at Hogwarts. The head of the DMLE was a Hufflepuff. The minister was a Slytherin. And from what my mother noted in her journal, she was considered to join Slytherin, but asked to not be placed there after her best friend warned against it. Harry informed as he turned a page again, not caring for the stunned reactions he was getting nor the whispers that were funneling in from the hallway. Evil comes in all forms, in every house, and in different people. There is no 100% good house, 100% evil house, 100% light, 100% dark, or even a 50-50 house. The house is merely what your strongest trait is at the time of the sorting, and nothing more. You decide what path to walk in life, just like everyone else does. If that's not acceptable to you, then please find another compartment, as I'm not leaving, nor am I asking them to leave," Harry stated as he sat there while Evie and Jacob were smirking. Ron sputtered and tried to reply as he was extremely red in the face. "Good day, Mr. Weasley," Harry stated in a dismissive tone as Ron finally found it in him to stomp away before he was further embarrassed. The 2 girls stood there a bit awkwardly before Evie spoke. "Would you like to sit with us?" she asked, glancing at the others. Do you mind? Ginny asked and saw Evie look at the others, who all shrugged since there was still space from Harry, causing the compartment to expand. Go ahead, Harry stated as he turned another page. Thank you, Ginny stated as she and Hermione pulled their trunks in before Harry waved his hand and caused them to go up into the rack, much to the astonishment of Blaise, Ginny, Hermione, Daphne, Isabella, and Tracy. You could do wandless? Daphne asked in shock as she stared at Harry. Yes, Harry stated as he kept reading. The majority just stared at him for his nonchalant attitude. As I told Susan and Hannah, be prepared to be surprised a lot when it comes to Harry. Evie stated as she shook her head at his actions. What house do you think you'll be in? Jacob asked, trying to get them to focus again. Well, I'm pretty sure I'll be in Hufflepuff. I'm not very cunning. I'm not very smart, but not dumb. And I'm not really brave either. Susan stated as she sat there. I think I'll be in Slytherin or Ravenclaw. Though Hufflepuff is acceptable, I don't want to be in Gryffindor. I'll be facing the opposite kind of bias that I would in Slytherin. Daphne stated, recovering from her shock quicker than the others did. Blaise, Isabella, and Tracy indicated they'd likely be the same as Daphne, making Harry snort. Then best of luck. I can guarantee you that Draco will be in Slytherin. You'll have your work cut out for you if you don't want to deal with him that often. Hufflepuff will make you have to be more social. Ravenclaw will be accepting if you are an isolationist or a group person, and Gryffindor is kind of a bag of shit and gold at the same time. Harry stated, making them frown at his point about Draco. Are you sure Professor Dumbledore wasn't a Gryffindor? A couple books hail him as such, and that he upholds the principles of the house. Hermione asked as Harry nodded. Yes, there's a book called Noteworthy Wizards of the Ages. It lists 100 witches and wizards along with details about them, such as what house they were sorted into, greatest achievements, and notable facts and deeds. Along with that, I have a journal by one of my ancestors that went to school with him. He wrote that Albus was brilliant but naive about a great many things. Harry stated as he flipped a page, making Hermione frown since she had wanted to go to Gryffindor to be like the great Albus Dumbledore, champion of the light. What she didn't know was that Dumble's got that rumor and notion floating out there intentionally to get Gryffindor as the lighthouse, so he knew who could be recruited to his side easier by going after those sorted into Gryffindor. He still kept eyes on the other houses, but Gryffindor was his chief recruitment point for his plans and efforts. Since the rivalry between Gryffindor and Slytherin was so legendary, all of his opponents would go to Slytherin unless they had enough brains to know that going to Hufflepuff or Ravenclaw would draw far less attention to themselves. A rather predictable and boring plan, but it had served him well, and like many wizards, Albus was of the approach of, if it isn't broken, don't mess with it when it came to things. He and many others would quickly learn the problem with following that principle very quickly if Harry had anything to say about it. What about you three? Daphne asked, looking at the three unknowns before her. Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff are the only two for us, Jacob stated, motioning to his sister and himself. Not the other two? Daphne asked, making the twins smirk. No, Gryffindors don't know when to shut up and observe, and Slytherin has too much negativity and blood supremacy in it for our liking. We'd be sending housemates to the hospital wing daily, and that wouldn't be ideal. Jacob stated, knowing that Harry was likely to go to Ravenclaw or Hufflepuff, though they knew which one he was more likely to go to. And you, Lord Potter? Tracy asked as she turned to the young man still reading the same book. Same, Harry stated simply as he turned the page again. What are you reading? Hermione asked as she couldn't take it anymore and was wondering how long a book that seemed so thin could be. Currently, I'm reading Rune's book that used to be on the required reading for school back when Runes was a mandatory subject. However, our esteemed headmaster and several others thought it wasn't necessary anymore and made it an elective, though that was more so they could cut funding and pay for the subject. It not being required meant that the school and ministry didn't have to pay for the full breadth of the supplies used, could reduce the teacher's pay, and charge less for admissions, as cutting costs means cutting necessary funding. A few of the older houses found that unacceptable and quickly made sure they bought one copy of every Runes book ever made, even if the book was solely theory. Harry explained as he turned another page. I'm sure there must have been a good reason, Hermione stated with a frown, and Harry shrugged. If there was, he never gave it, not even when questioned by people in a higher position of authority than him. Coincidentally, Those people who questioned him were replaced within a year. Harry stated idly as he kept reading, making a few of the people frown. Can I see it? Hermione asked, and Harry shook his head. Why not? She asked in confusion. A. I'm currently reading it. B. It's advanced, so you need to at least have some understanding of runes first before you read, or you won't understand it. C. I don't know you that well, so I'm not loaning you anything yet. Harry reasoned politely and calmly, making Hermione frown, but she couldn't fault him for that since they had just met after all. Conversation then broke out into a variety of topics and subjects, with all but Evie and Jacob being surprised at the literal wealth of information that Harry had. Whether it was school subjects, politics, Quidditch, history, it didn't matter. He had information to share and opinions on it. Eventually, they reached the station, with the boys changing first in the compartment and then the girls doing so, as they were required to wear school robes. Disembarking, they found a rather tall man named Hagrid calling all first years to him before he led them to a group of boats and told them it was 4 to a boat. The Slytherin quartet, as Harry had jokingly named Daphne, Tracy, Isabella, and Blaze's group, got in one boat. Hermione got in another with Susan, Hannah, and Ginny. Harry, Jacob, and Evie were in one boat and were joined by a boy named Terry Boot before they set out. Unless you want the giant squid to possibly slap you, or anything else living in the lake to get agitated, I'd stop splashing if I were you. Harry suddenly called, looking at a boy that was splashing the water a bit. The boy yelped and jerked away from the edge as Harry shook his head before smiling at the grand sight of Hogwarts illuminated by various torches, sconces, braziers, and candles with the moon as a backdrop to it. Never gets old seeing that. Harry idly thought with a smile, enjoying the fact his two friends were getting such a sight as well. Reaching the docks, they disembarked and followed Hagrid inside to a staircase where McGonagall was waiting for them. All yours, Professor, Hagrid stated as McGonagall nodded to him, and he lumbered off. Welcome, I am Professor McGonagall. I teach Transfiguration here, as well as serving as head of house for Gryffindor and deputy headmistress of this school. In a few moments, you will enter through these doors and will be sorted into one of the 4 houses of this school: Gryffindor, Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff, and Slytherin. While you are here, your house shall be your family, and with all families there will be some getting used to and adjustments required. Do well and act appropriately in school, and you will earn points for your house in order to win the House Cup at the end of the year. Do poorly or break rules, and you will lose points. Act out badly enough, and you will receive detention. Continue to do so after that, and you can face suspension or even expulsion, with the latter carrying a minimum 2-year wait before you can possibly be readmitted. And you will be returning as the year you were expelled. McGonagall stated with a harsh tone, making Harry roll his eyes, knowing in the history of Dumbledore being headmaster, no student had been expelled no matter what they had done. Even before he became headmaster, Hagrid had been the only expelled student in the last 140 years, and that was because he was framed by a certain asshole with a stupid made-up name. If Hagrid proved to be a useful ally, or at least a kind enough man that he could remember him being, Harry could probably get his record expunged and maybe get him a wand again. Now, wait here while I ensure everything is prepared for your sorting, McGonagall stated as she walked through the large doors. What do you think it is? Daphne asked as she stood by Harry and the others. Don't know, boss, Jacob asked, looking at Harry, who smirked. I could tell you, but why ruin the surprise? Harry stated with the smirk in place, making Jacob sigh in annoyance before a voice spoke. So it's true, what they said on the train. Harry Potter has come to Hogwarts. Draco Malfoy stated as he came up with his 2 thugs, Vincent Crabbe and Gregory Goyle, right behind him. This is Crabbe and Goyle, and I'm Malfoy, Draco Malfoy, Draco stated as Harry looked at him. Oh, license to kill? Harry asked, getting some snorts and light laughs from a few of the half-bloods and muggleborns. What? What the bloody hell are you on about? Draco asked, and Harry rolled his eyes. Yup, he's a Malfoy, all right, Harry thought before addressing him. It's a muggle reference, Harry explained, somewhat enjoying the offended/disgusted look on Malfoy's face when he mentioned that. I have no idea why you want to associate with those cretins, but you'll learn quickly that associating with the wrong sort of families can lead to ruin. I can help you there, Draco stated with a smirk as Harry nodded. Interesting. Tell me, is a family that engages in rape, theft, murder, genocide, bribery, extortion, corruption, blackmail, terrorism, and attempted line theft. A family I should associate with?" Harry asked as he gazed meaningfully at Draco, who felt a bit unnerved at Harry's look as well as the whispers that were starting to break out from Harry's question. A few more observant students noted it was a real Slytherin move in that he just brought suspicion and attention onto Draco without actually accusing his family of doing anything. It was even more impressive as the first years would spread what happened to all the other years, and thus everyone would be talking about it. Meaning Draco had to do damage control before this possibly spiraled and made its way back to his father. "Oh no, you shouldn't," Draco stated, trying to keep some confidence. Good to know," Harry commented before McGonagall returned and ushered them into the hall. Harry didn't pay any mind to the floating candles, enchanted ceiling, the 4 tables, or the teacher's table within the hall. No, his eyes were locked on Albus fucking Dumbledore, and Harry had to restrain himself quite a bit. Now was not the time to make any move against him, but Harry already had several plans in the works to do so when he was ready. For now, he'd bide his time and build his own power base before tearing away at the old man's power and image. "When I call your name, please step forward and take a seat on the stool. I will then place the sorting hat upon your head, and you will be sorted to your house," McGonagall stated as she held the old hat up. "Hannah Abbott," she called, and Hannah went up and was put in Hufflepuff, and the sorting continued down the line of names alphabetically. The only ones Harry paid attention to were Susan, who went to Hufflepuff unsurprisingly, Terry Boot, who went to Hufflepuff, and Tracy, who went to Ravenclaw to the shock of many save for Daphne, Blaise, and Isabella. Evie Fry. McGonagall called, making said girl walk up, making Flitwick and Sprout pay a bit attention, and Harry easily saw the plain interest Dumbledore had. The hat was placed on her head. "Well, you're an interesting one, though from what your mind tells me, Lord Potter will definitely be a one-of-a-kind experience for me," a voice stated within her mind, but she didn't react. "Yes, I am the sorting hat, and to ease your mind, I can't reveal any information I find to anyone. Now let's see where to place you. Plenty of bravery, cunning, and intelligence, but your loyalty is where you shine, though considering your feelings and the history involved, it's not that surprising. However, given your own predilection for things, I'd suggest Ravenclaw." The hat continued, making Evie raise an eyebrow. "You're asking me?" Evie asked, and the hat snorted. "I am not so callous to not take into account your own desires and feelings. While you would no doubt thrive in Slytherin, I fear your brother's prediction that you'd send people to the hospital wing constantly is true. Hufflepuff will let you bond with others, but you'll find less privacy than you'd like at times. Gryffindor, you will have a hard time tolerating the people there at times, and the requirement to be rivals with Slytherin would begin to annoy you." The hat continued as Evie gave a mental nod of agreement. "Best of luck," the hat commented before shouting, "Ravenclaw," getting cheers from said table as Evie removed the hat and made her way over. Jacob was called next, and the hat barely touched his head before it shouted, "Ravenclaw," making him nod as he placed the hat down and went and sat beside his sister, who merely rolled her eyes at him while giving a smile. The sorting continued with Hermione also going to Ravenclaw, and Daphne then joined her, shocking many as they truly believed she'd go to Slytherin. Draco Malfoy was the most shocked, and it looked like he was a bit angry, no doubt planning to use the time in the same dorm to get Daphne under his thumb in some way. Apparently, he wasn't so angry or upset to change houses as he predictably went to Slytherin, with Harry knowing he had more respect and command in that house than in any other. Plus, his 2 guard dogs were there already, so he wasn't about to go to a lesser house without protection. Isabella then stepped up, and it surprised people that she actually needed a bit before being sorted. Of course, her going to Ravenclaw was even further shocking to people, and Draco looked even more enraged by that. Harry did notice her sending a questioning and curious glance his way as she walked to the table. The fact that she immediately began whispering to Daphne about something while subtly looking at him meant the hat likely made a passing mention on something. Some more names were called that Harry had marked on 3 mental lists. Neville Longbottom, the boy looking for the toad on the train, went to Gryffindor. Pansy Parkinson, Millicent Bulstrode, and Theodore Not went to Slytherin. Padma Patil went to Ravenclaw, while her twin sister Parvati went to Gryffindor along with a girl named Lavender Brown. Hadrian Potter. McGonagall called, making the whole hall go quiet until Harry stepped up, and then whispers broke out with Dumbledore showing clear surprise at the sight of him, and McGonagall, Flitwick, and Sprout showing relief since they didn't know if he'd come. Harry ignored them all as he waved his hand at the hat, casting a simple cleaning charm on it, before he sat on the stool and let the hat be placed on his head. Oh, most interesting indeed, Lord Potter. I must say, each of the founders would be begging to have you in their house, both due to your lineage and for your actions, plans, and persona. To say that you are loyal, brave, intelligent, and cunning would be an injustice to how you really are. You exemplify Gryffindor in that you are fearless and take all that you desire without fear. But you're not so foolish as to be blindly courageous or charge in without planning. You're a true Hufflepuff in that you are loyal to your people and obviously are hardworking, but not blindly so, and will fight to destroy anyone that threatens that, which you choose to protect. You show a true Ravenclaw as you seek knowledge to better yourself and those around you, while at the same time not turning down the advancement of knowledge to live in the past as others do and seek to understand the knowledge rather than just possess it. And must we even go over why you are a true Slytherin? To say you're dangerous, ambitious, and tactical would be an understatement to your skills and mentality. Your plans for the future, both to improve your position as well as destroy your enemies, are also intriguing. And I wish you the best of luck, as I can't interfere in those. And as you know, I can't divulge any secrets of yours to anyone, not even the headmaster. Your plans are already showing results, as your information on the train caused ripples in the different students being influenced by your words. The Sorting Hat stated as Harry sat there. You've stated where I can fit and that you know my plans, but you've yet to actually pick my house. Harry replied, as the Hat wasn't telling him anything he didn't know. The Hat merely chuckled. Ah, I like you, Lord Potter. I'm sure I will enjoy you tormenting and driving Albus up the wall with the things you'll do, and I do hope your plans for succession work out for you. As for your house, you obviously will need one of the solitary rooms, meaning Ravenclaw or Slytherin. Given your desire to keep the public away from you too much and not have to send people to the hospital each year, you'll be going to Ravenclaw, where you'll likely have to whip some of them into shape, as there are a few bullies there that will need to be fixed. The Hat continued, making Harry hum a bit, though the Hat could sense his annoyance and anger at that, and no doubt that many would be getting humiliated or sent to the hospital wing in the coming years. I'll handle it, Harry stated, simply already having a guess on who the problem children were. Best of luck, and thank you for the cleaning charm. It's been ages since someone used one on me, the Hat stated before he shouted, Ravenclaw! It shouted, getting the table of blue to start cheering wildly that they got Potter, though a few looked curious of if he could keep up intellectually. The Hufflepuffs politely clapped, not caring what house he was in, though some fear and worry would have come from him being sent to Slytherin. The Gryffindors sat there in shock and horror at the boy who lived not being a golden boy Gryffindor, as expected, especially since his parents were Gryffindors. Many were wondering if the Hat had malfunctioned or something, and the Slytherins were a mixture of shock, confusion, and contemplation. Many of the true Slytherins had been planning for years on how to interact and handle a Gryffindor Potter, not a Ravenclaw, and were quickly weighing pros, cons, and the proper course of action. Many of the Slytherins and him only were simply thinking about how Potter must be a weakling, as he only had brains going for him. They'd learn their lessons soon enough, though. Of course, it wasn't only the students that were reacting to Harry's placement. McGonagall was disappointed, but she figured she didn't make that good of an impression on him when she went there with Flitwick and Sprout. He was at Hogwarts, and that was good enough. Flitwick was ecstatic over having Harry in his house, and hoped he could mentor the boy like he had his mother, though he could see easily enough that Harry was more advanced than his current peers, especially in offensive magic, since his stance was that of a trained duelist as well as an aura mixed in. Someone had definitely trained the boy, though who that was, Flitwick couldn't begin to guess. Plus, the mature air around the boy would serve him well among the teachers, and possibly help keep some of the rowdier members of the house under control, and keep the house unified and together. Severus Snape could also see that Harry was trained and knew how to carry himself in a fight. As a target for bullies in school, and dealing with his bastard father, He had to be able to read people at a mere glance and know who a threat was and who wasn't. Potter clearly had the stance of a fighter, if not an orator, and carried himself with confidence, but he wasn't strutting around like a pea. If not for the fact that he had buried his feud with the Marauders. Except for Black, since he led to the death of his best friend and sister figure Lily, he likely would be scowling and despising the boy. He just hoped the boy was as smart as his parents were, otherwise he'd likely feel a dislike through disappointment. He was annoyed at Draco Malfoy being in Slytherin, despite the fact the boy was his godson, since the boy couldn't be tactical, cunning, or careful even when his life depended on it. His father was a true Slytherin, and his mother was a Slytherin incarnate, but the boy relied too much on his father's name and money to protect him rather than being smart about how to do things. His anti-Muggle-born sentiments would only increase Snape's headaches, especially if the boy thought that being his godson would give him a pass in potions. Yes, he certainly hoped he didn't have as many idiots, dunderheads, and aggravations in class this year. The fact that there was a new set of Weasley twins attending did not get his hopes up that high. Albus was contemplative as he watched Harry, not happy that he wasn't put into Gryffindor and that he was trained by someone outside of his control. He wanted Harry to be a stereotypical Gryffindor that would charge headlong into trouble bravely, yet foolishly without fully planning, and look up to him as a mentor, role model, and leader. But a Harry that would think, plan, and learn all he could to face his problems was not good, especially since Albus knew Harry would need to die eventually, and an intelligent and questioning Harry may try to escape that. He at least wasn't in Slytherin. From what Minerva had told him, it was entirely possible that he was semi-dark since he was taking over Nocturnally and wasn't exactly friendly towards outsiders. He'd have no control over Slytherin Harry, and the boy who lived being a Slytherin and possibly dark would not be good at all. Harry had a lot of influence on the younger generation, and even some of the older generation. Whatever stance he took in life, people would follow or try to do the same, and that was dangerous for many reasons. Albus needed to get Harry under his control, which he hoped to do through some scheduled meetings at the Wisengamot while also having some resources looking into where the hell the Dursleys had gone. The fact that people were referring to him as Lord Potter was also not good. Harry wasn't ever supposed to know about, let alone take, any lordship he was eligible for. The problem was that he couldn't check and see if Harry had somehow gotten his rank as heir elevated to lord without drastically overstepping his bounds and drawing more attention to himself. He just had to hope that they only called himself that because he somehow got in charge of that group, not because he'd actually ascended to the status of lord, since that would cause several problems. His thoughts were broken with shock and fear as the next name on the list was read, Delphine Riddle. McGonagall called making a young girl with silver hair that had blue tips and hazel eyes. She walked up and sat on the stool, and the hat was quiet for a few minutes before it shouted, Ravenclaw, sending her to the Raven table, where she promptly sat next to Harry and smiled at him and the Fry twins before engaging in some talk. Albus couldn't comprehend it. When could Voldemort, aka Tom Riddle, have possibly had a child? And who did he have her with? He idly remembered some subtle rumors that perhaps Tom had been close to his chief lieutenant a few times, but he had passed them off as absurd, as Tom had no intention of dying, and thus wouldn't need a legacy or something to continue after he was gone, as he had no intention of being gone. What's worse, he could see her sitting with Harry and his two cohorts and talking as if they were friends for years. This was not good, and he had to figure something out soon, or he could lose his weapon and key, not to mention his only chance at getting one of the other Hollows. The sorting continued from there as Blaise went to Slytherin and Ron Weasley went to Gryffindor. However, the surprise came when Ginny went to Ravenclaw, whether that was to strike out on her own or just to avoid her twin, or to possibly be closer to her semi-friends, or just be closer to Harry was anyone's guess. Once it finished, Dumbledore had some random words to say, which Harry knew were just the signal for the house elves to deliver the food for the feast. Harry was in Hogwarts. Now it was time to start fucking up the status quo. Done. Next time? Shit happens, classes, confrontations, assholes losing their minds. Who knows? We'll see when I eventually write it. Also, Waldert is not an OC. Thanks to my patrons: Terminator 1738, Andrew Stevens, Shadow 9 Fox, Janice Christopher Saunderskov, Patrick Farrow, Smilex, Dylan Page, William Scondras, Tom Corey, Joseph, Matthew Anderson, Jason Anderson, Hurt Fanfiction, Kelly Payeur, Rich Didcott, Matthew Jackson, Yuri Listens, Corey Toller, Aisha, Knight, Ellis, Dragging 213, The Dark Knight, Tommy Mars, William Kwok, and Visible Colt 136. Thank you all for your continued support. That's it. See you all next time. Class begins. Hello and welcome back. This is taking place right after Chapter 1. Glad to see this is getting some love. I'd likely keep writing it even if it wasn't, since I'm enjoying it, but it's still nice all the same. Gonna warn that this chapter is a bit of an info dump chapter, as Harry analyzes the students of his year and weighs who will be an ally worth having, who could be an ally if they stepped up, and who is going to be a pain in his ass. Also, you may see spells and magic from other items added into this. But as of this moment, I have no intention of crossing anything fully into this until YEA later. So you may see spells from Bleach, Warcraft, Chaotic, etc. as this FIC goes on, but not necessarily seeing those items crossed into this. Gonna give fair warning that Harry is gonna be pretty OP, but I have a reason for it, and to my knowledge, it's never been done before. So give me the benefit of the doubt until you see what's going on in full if you're one of those that isn't into OP characters. Secondly, Harry will be more mature, smart, and wise than his age would suggest, and there is a reason for it. And no, it doesn't involve time travel, or he died and then woke up in his younger body, or he's been reincarnated. Also, this is a harem FIC, though not every girl Harry meets is joining the harem. And no, I don't have an exact count or know all of who I'm going to add. Also, this harem will consist of servants, slaves, wives, girlfriends, mistresses, and other such titles. With that said and done, let's get this show on the road. Disclaimer: I don't own Harry Potter or anything else that may appear in this FIC. Speech, thoughts, language that's not English. Spell name, conversation thoughts. Chapter 2. Class begins. Hogwarts Great Hall. Just after the sorting, Harry ate calmly as he sat with Jacob, Evie, and Delphine, shortened to Delphi, while the other first years were scattered on either side of them. He acknowledged the various greetings he got, but didn't show much interest beyond that, and merely stuck to eating and getting a feel for everyone in the room. Dumbledore was the most powerful person there, which wasn't surprising at all. Next was a tie between Flitwick, McGonagall, and Severus Snape. Following them was Sprout and Vector, and it tapered off from there. One teacher with a turban, named Quirinus Quirrell, was suppressing his magical power, but even with his friend helping him, he wasn't even half as strong as Dumbledore from what Harry could sense. Some of the 7th years were disappointing as their magical power and potential was lower than some of the 3rd years around him. 2 older Hufflepuffs had potential, though one was due to her lineage helping things as well as her natural talent. However, no one struck him as immediately interesting for allying with or possibly getting to his side fighting-wise on power alone. Politically, there were numerous options. Even with a few being minor houses, it still helped to have extra support in things. Although, if some proved capable, he considered training and maybe recruiting them to his side for combat and the like. If he didn't take into account what people could be worth with some work, more than half his employees and holdings wouldn't be under his command at the moment. Nope, better to take the diamonds that needed a bit of polishing and refining to truly shine over those that had a moderate gleam to them, no matter what you did with them. That wasn't to say he wouldn't take the mediocre if the opportunity presented itself. Not every comrade and employee could be a shining example to the others. Some were just examples and some worked in the background to make the overall process flow flawlessly. Besides, it was never too early to recruit, whether for information, supplies, support, help, protection, or alliances. Dumbledore did it before, during, and after Grindelwald's escapades, and Old Moldy short-started during school, using the Slytherins to spread his name and influence, though the fool never actively tried recruiting from the other houses. Hence the stigma hung over Slytherin and made them easy targets for his opponents. Dumbledore did the same thing for the Gryffindors, making them targets for retaliation against him. Less Slytherin students meant less Voldemort supporters. Less Gryffindor students meant less Dumbledore supporters. Meanwhile, Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw were caught in the crossfire or largely left alone or deemed unimportant to the war going on. If any true Slytherins decided to think for a minute, they'd have instructed their children to either sort to a different house to break stigma and the target on them, or at least told them to make connections and allies in school. Hogwarts was essentially a giant networking opportunity. Become friends with a child, and you could gain the favor of that child's family and allies, as well as getting additional resources at your disposal if the time came. However, most were idiots and simply stuck to their own house, thereby making the same connections that their parents already had unless a new blood moved to the Isles and thus joined Hogwarts. B. They connected to any Muggle-born or half-bloods that were then sorted to those houses. Or C. They managed to get into a marriage contract with another family and thus gain in connection that way. Harry broke from his musings/monologue as an older girl, maybe 13, decided to speak to him. I'm Cho Chang. Welcome to Ravenclaw, home of the Eagles. Cho introduced as Harry wiped his hands on his napkin before shaking her hand and giving it a light kiss, causing her to blush a bit. Pleasure, Miss Chong. You already know who I am, Harry stated as he released her hand and went to his food. Why are we called Eagles if the house is Ravenclaw? Jacob asked, looking at Harry. Cho was about to answer that no one knew when Harry answered. Rowena Ravenclaw had an eagle for a familiar, and her Animagus transformation was an eagle. Her familiar was her closest friend and confidant until she met the other founders, and then her husband. So she made the sigil an eagle in her honor. Harry answered casually as he ate, as nearly everyone on hearing distance looked at him. Ah, that would make sense, Jacob stated as he went back to his food. Is that true? Hermione asked, and Harry nodded. How do you know? She added as Harry ate. My family kept extensive and detailed journals through the ages. We saw too much of Muggles and other magic folk altering history to suit their own needs and desires. So, we kept all the history we witnessed archived, and I had quite a few ancestors around during the time of the founders and beyond. It's a bit sad. One of my ancestors was almost married to Helena Ravenclaw before she ran away and then was killed by the Bloody Baron, Harry revealed, making many widen their eyes in shock. Yeah, right. You're just making this up to seem impressive, a boy that looked to be in Cho's year stated. Harry doesn't lie. Jacob, Evie, and Delphi all stated at the same time in an automatic tone. I'm sure. The boy scoffed. Corner. Don't be rude, Chi stated with a glare. You can ask her if you want confirmation, though she may not know about my ancestor as he wasn't Potter at the time, Harry stated casually as he kept eating. Ask who? Another girl that looked to be in Cho's year asked. Helena Ravenclaw. You can ask her to confirm what I said, Harry stated simply. And how are we supposed to do that? Hold a seance or try our hand at necromancy? Corner asked, getting laughs. You're not spiritually attuned enough for a seance and not smart enough for necromancy, Harry stated, making Corner growl as others giggled or laughed. Fortunately, neither are required since Helena is our house ghost. I believe you call her the Grey Lady, Harry added, making everyone stare at him in shock. Wait, what? She asked in shock, only just having enough control not to scream. The Grey Lady is Helena Ravenclaw, daughter of Rowena Ravenclaw, you know, the founder of our house, Harry stated casually as he kept eating. So why did the Bloody Baron kill her? Daphne decided to ask, intrigued by the story. He was one of the first students here and looked up the founders as his parents and closest friends. He used his wealth and influence to help protect Hogwarts and was a great tracker. Helena ran away with her mother's diadem after getting fed up with everyone comparing her to her mother and hearing of her mother's genius. She took the diadem thinking it was the key to her intelligence, only to find out it was nothing but a tool. Anyway, Rowena was dying and wished to see her daughter one last time and asked the Baron and my ancestor to bring her back. The Baron found her, but fell in love at first sight and became determined to win her heart. Harry started pulling others into the tale. His advances were futile, and still he kept trying until he resorted to magic to force her to love him. However, Helena wouldn't fall so easily, and upon realizing what he'd done, she vowed to return home and to tell the founders what he had done. Horrified, angry, and fearful at what they would think, he lashed out and killed Helena, who lamented and regretted not seeing her mother again. Upon realizing what he had done, he broke down and decided the best way to atone for his crimes was to take his own life, sending a message to my ancestor asking that he ensure Helena was returned to be properly buried. My ancestor returned them both to Hogwarts, being spared the task of telling Rowena as she had passed a week before. The two were then drawn to Hogwarts as it was the place both longed to return to and finish their unattended matters. Rowena returned in a near shade-like state, showing her mourning and sadness at the end, while the Baron was forever coated in his hand. Helena's blood, a punishment for his crimes. They've been here ever since. Harry finished his tale, as everyone was either looking on in shock, awe, or sadness over how things happened. Before anyone could comment, Dumbledore stood. Now that we've all eaten our fill, I shall move on to the announcements. He started as all, but a few paid attention to him. First, I shall inform the first years and remind certain older students that the dark forest near the edge of the school property is forbidden to all students that do not have express permission to be there. Secondly, our caretaker Mr. Filch has asked to remind and inform all of you that magic in the hallways is prohibited, and he will be searching for contraband after every Hogsmeade trip. Dumbledore continued with some basic announcements like curfew, what times food was served, how the point system worked, and some other things that Harry didn't pay attention to. Finally, I will inform you all that this year, the third-floor corridor on the right-hand side is restricted to all students, even prefects and head students. Anyone caught there will face severe consequences, perhaps even suspension and expulsion, and that is, sadly, only if you are found there in time, as you could face a rather tragic death. He continued, shocking many as Harry didn't react. Hogwarts has been home to some very dangerous artifacts in the past, and while the staff have ensured no serious harm has come to students in the past, there have been moments in time where we were too late to save them from being harmed in some manner. Dumbledore stated in a deadly serious voice, making many whisper and wonder what the fuck was put in the castle that was so dangerous. Harry glanced at his three friends in silent communication, and they nodded and continued eating. They'd talk when they had some more privacy. However, keeping your distance will mean you're perfectly fine. Dumbledore then added in a cheery voice, making Harry roll his eyes. Apparently, Dumbledore was still using the old fool routine to make people underestimate and possibly trust him. A fair tactic to use at times, but not constantly when previous generations had grown wise to what you were doing and warned their children about it. Another showcase of the wizarding world strictly following the "if it ain't broke, don't fix it" mantra. Didn't matter anyway. It just made it easier for Harry as he moved through the scenes. Getting too fixated on a plan makes one blind to what could be improved upon, but it also made it harder to recover and adapt if cracks formed and pieces began to fall away. It's why chess grandmasters were the ones who constantly adapted and thought up moves, planning things out 3 or more moves in advance against their opponent, so no matter what happened, they still had a plan ready. Of course, a few were also the unpredictable. You couldn't anticipate them because they didn't know what they were going to do until they did it. They were usually opponents real masters wanted to play against because the unpredictability made them have to keep adapting and changing plans based on the moves they made. It taught them to be quick on their feet and adapt quickly. Harry had the benefit of being both types of chess player. He could make plans and adapt on the fly as he needed. So far, it was serving him well. He had plans in motion already, and he was adapting to the changes that were occurring since he honestly wasn't counting on Greengrass, Davis, and the female Malfoy to come to Ravenclaw. He suspected Granger would, since Gryffindor was appealing to her solely for the fact Dumbledore was connected to it. Without that, then Ravenclaw was where she'd want to be. Harry broke from his musings as it came time to leave. He and the other first years followed the Ravenclaw prefects to their dorm, which was basically the tallest tower of the castle. As they walked, Harry looked around the castle, noting any changes to it or the layout, while only idly hearing the prefects talk about Hogwarts and their house. Eventually, they reached the dormitory door. This is the Ravenclaw dormitory door. To enter, you have to answer a riddle that the Eagle Door Knocker will ask. Don't worry if you get stuck. It will ask a different one if you want, and you can always ask an older student, so that way you learn. The female prefect stated as they looked to the knocker, which was a golden eagle holding gold ring in its beak. What building is always the tallest, no matter what city or town it is located in? It asked, making the prefects raise an eyebrow since they'd hadn't heard that one. Almost all the first years frowned in confusion since the obvious answers wouldn't make that much of a riddle. A library. Harry spoke up as the eagle nodded. Correct, you potential young one. It stated before the door opened, causing Harry and his three friends to step through. This in turn caused the prefects to snap out of their surprise and usher the others in. Walking up a few more stairs had them on a landing that opened into a split room. One half looked to be a meeting room or a solar, while the other half looked like a study or small library. The prefects went over a few more things. Boys go up the left staircase, the girls up the right, curfew, rules on taking any of the books from the common room, and a few others before leaving them to their own devices. A library? Tracy asked as they all sat. They have so many stories. Harry said, simply getting a few snorts. Nice to know the knocker has a sense of humor. Daphne stated, shaking her head. She then turned to look at Delphi. Hello, I'm Daphne Greengrass. She introduced cordially as Delphi smiled. Delphine Riddle, Delphi for short. Pleased to make your acquaintance. Delphi stated before the others Harry met on the train introduced themselves. By the way, why didn't your friend Blaise come too? Jacob asked, and Daphne shrugged. First, it would make Malfoy back off a bit since being in separate houses means we're not as close, so he won't be harassed as much. Second, his grandfather, his head of house, would not tolerate it if he didn't go to Slytherin, so he didn't have much choice. Daphne explained, making Jacob nod in understanding. Yet another clear sign that Draco's an idiot. The Zabini family aren't that powerful in Britain, but they've got immense pull back in Italy, and that pull can be felt all the way back here. I'm surprised Lord Malfoy hasn't beaten some sense into his son over antagonizing and making potential enemies instead of allies and friends. It's going to make his business deals in the future that much harder if old Angelo finds out his grandson is being targeted, though his ire will also go to Blaise at not handling things better. Harry commented as he sat back in a chair with his hands folded in front of him. How do you know his grandfather's name? Tracy asked, and Harry just looked at her. All right, you said you did your research. She stated sheepishly, recalling how he had explained on the train that he made it a point to look into anyone he could come into contact with. I wanted to ask, and it doesn't matter to us on the answer, but are you 3 purebloods, half-bloods, or a muggle-born? Isabella asked, looking at the Fry twins and Delphi. The trio looked at each other a moment before Jacob answered. Muggle-born, technically for us. Our father was muggle-born, but our mother was a muggle, so we have no magical grandparents to give us status as a half-bloods, let alone purebloods. He stated, making them nod. Half-blood for me. Mum's a pureblood and Dad's a half-blood. Delphi stated, making them nod again. Don't feel bad. My mother was muggle-born, and she was classified as a prodigy that put many purebloods and half-bloods to shame. Old Moldy Shorts even wanted to recruit her at one time. Harry stated calmly as he relaxed back in the chair. Really? Hermione asked in shock, and Harry nodded. Yup, she was actually who Professor Slughorn, the former potions teacher and head of Slytherin House, wanted to take over as potions teacher when he retired. However, she didn't want to, as she was more interested in experimentation than teaching the same things over and over again, year after year, while having to deal with purebloods looking down on her and not respecting her despite her qualifications. Harry informed, making them nod in understanding. Anyway, we should turn in for the night. Gonna be a busy day tomorrow. Harry finally stated as he stood and nodded to them before walking off with Jacob right behind him. Evie and Delphi then stood and nodded to the 5 girls before walking off for the female dorms. Hermione and Ginny eventually followed and nodded good night to the other girls, leaving the 3 friends. He's not at all what I was expecting, Tracy stated once they were alone, and she adjusted her glasses slightly. I know. He's more controlled, calm, collected, and educated than what we'd been led to believe. Daphne replied, knowing that they were led to believe that Potter was raised in the Muggle world. Yes, it's clear he's well-informed and well-educated. He can act the perfect pureblood and even knows how to work a person with words alone. Isabella stated, recalling the way he handled her brother just before the sorting. Indeed, I can see why the hat suggested coming here to get under his protection. It also doesn't hurt our families wanted us to try and ally with him. Daphne added, knowing that the Potter family was feared and respected by many, and Harry surviving the killing curse and causing Voldemort to be defeated only furthered those two things. If he was to be the Lord of House Black as well, that would only further his control and political power. We'll have to write to our families, explain why we aren't where they'd expect us to be. You especially, Isabella. Tracy advised, knowing Isabella's father and mother would want to know why she wasn't in Slytherin. I know, I plan to write it tonight and send it off in the morning before Draco can try something or place a ton of blame on me without giving the full story. Isabella replied, making her two friends nod in understanding. Then we may as well get to work before turning in for the night. Daphne stated, making the other two nod as they went to the dorm and then their own rooms to begin writing the letters. Meanwhile, Harry had just finished altering his room, making it larger and making sure he had complete privacy. Once that was done, he called Deke, who quickly brought in his personal items such as workout equipment and his desk and reading chair. After thanking Deke, Harry quickly wrote a couple letters before calling for his raven to take them to their destination. Once that was finished, he sat down and began meditating and thought on the people he'd now gotten closer to. Daphne Greengrass was heiress of the Greengrass family, a neutral family with a lot of money and political influence built up over the years. They had been a mixed family as members had been politicians, aurors, teachers, enchantresses, businessmen/women, and more. They weren't as feared as other families, but they were still feared and respected, which is partly why Malfoy Sr. wanted to get Junior in with them to acquire their wealth and political power for himself and his family. Harry knew she'd be ambitious, cunning, smart, and quick on her feet. It was just a matter of if she'd have the princess mentality, or if she'd be willing to put in work for things or not. He was leaning towards the latter since her family wasn't the type to just be handed shit and not work for it at some point. So she was a possible ally in the future. Tracy Davis was of the Davis family, a family that had political and monetary standing but swore fealty to the Greengrass family for past actions and saving their livelihood and lives at times. They and the Greengrass swapped at times on who was the political forefront for their group, as they had some very minor families to back them up as well, and had tried at times to unify the two houses through marriage. But the matchups never really worked out, and the parents weren't going to force the children to marry if they weren't compatible with each other. Anyway, having Tracy on his side could gain him Lord Davis's favor if he needed it, and that could be useful in the future. Isabella Malfoy was the primary heiress for the Malfoy family, which was likely not informed to her since no Malfoy female had been head of house in over 100 years. Regardless, the Malfoy family had nothing but money and political power, gained through money, going for them, hence why they weren't as high a ranked house as the heads had been trying to make it. Not even money could buy you higher grade status for your house, no matter how much you spent and who was given it. Anyway, Isabella was distant family thanks to her mother being a Black and Harry's own great-great-grandmother being a Black as well. So he considered looking out for her, since she was leagues better than her brother at the moment. Hermione Granger was a Muggle-born, so he didn't have a great deal of information on her, but she was clearly one of those authority-worshipping types as well as strict rule follower. Maybe he could break her of that, but it was unknown at the moment, and she could either be useful, annoying, or a pain in the ass depending on how things go. And Ginny Weasley, the only female child of Arthur and Molly Weasley, and technically youngest child. Her family wasn't wealthy by any definition, but Arthur worked hard to provide, though it reflected poorly on Molly that she never even considered getting some kind of job to add income to the family. It was 2 adults and 5 children at the moment, and at one point it was 7 children living there all at once. It was even worse when you considered Molly came from a known dueling and combat magic family, and was now just content being a housewife and wasn't even trying to train her children to be fighters or how to handle themselves should they be threatened. He hoped Ginny wasn't raised to be a fangirl of his, since he could see one of both of her parents raising her with the intention of getting with him to add money, status, and attention to their family, even if it may be unintentional on Arthur's part. All in all, they had potential, though he snorted in amusement that the first people he connects with are all females linked to potentially ally families. He just knew his friend was going to give him crap for that even if it wasn't intentional. He shook his head to clear those thoughts and focused on his meditation for a while before eventually turning in for the night. The next morning had Harry, Jacob, Evie, and Delphi getting up early, the first three to do morning exercises and the fourth to relax and wake up while they did them. Delphi was friends with them, and she gladly learned from Harry every chance she could, but she was not a physical type person. Physical labor and exercise was just not her thing to do or experience or willingly participate in. She didn't judge those that did, but it was just not her thing. She did enough to keep in decent shape, but not to the degree her three friends did. Granted, she wasn't as involved in their activities as they were, but she was willing to support and help any way she could. She was also hoping Harry's plans for some of her family would be set in motion soon, but she knew how to be patient after getting lectured by Harry enough on it. Once he Trio's morning workout was done, they returned to the dorm and showered before dressing for the day. They also took the time to discuss the third-floor corridor and what was there. Neither of three were surprised Harry knew what was there, though they were surprised the owner would relinquish it so easily. They weren't going to question it. The man could do what he wanted with it. They were just surprised is all. Arriving at the Great Hall, they moved and sat with their other year mates. The ones they knew personally as well as the ones they knew only by the fact their names were called at the sorting last night. Anthony Goldstein was a half-blood distant relative of Queenie and Porpentina Goldstein, meaning he was also a distant relative of Newt Scamander and his family. His magic level was average, not impressive, but not sad either. The Goldstein family had been rather neutral in the political field, likely due to their American United States, specifically roots affecting their perspective. They didn't drink up the Dumbledore as the next Merlin bullshit like others, but they didn't like or support the pureblood movement either. They did have a line of natural legilimencers, ones who could use legilimency, the art of attacking the mind and mind reading, naturally without even trying or even doing more than looking at a person. But given that, Anthony didn't seem too uncomfortable. He either didn't have that talent or had been taught how to suppress it rather well. Terry Boot of the Boot family, an active family in the political field, but another that had stayed neutral. Terry was descended of Albert Boot, a minister of magic in the 18th century who really fucked up the handling of a goblin rebellion, and three of Harry's ancestors helped clean it, and the next one up, and Webster Boot, the adopted son of Livermore founders James Stewart and Isolde Sayer, the latter of whom was a descendant of Salazar Slytherin, which in theory meant that Terry or someone related to him could be eligible for the Slytherin lordship if they tried their hand at it. He also had a cousin that attended Hogwarts before either of he or Harry were born and was seeker for the Ravenclaw team along with one other. Anyway, the Boots had a talent for charms and magic crafting with clothes, hence their family name, as their ancestors were bootmakers. Padma Patil was a pure blood of Indian, as an Indian not American, descent, and her family had gone back and forth on living in Britain and living in India, keeping ties to both for their business and magical interests. Although, he knew that there were a few problems cropping up for the Patils and wondered if the twins were aware of the situation. Unlikely was Harry's thought, but he'd wait and see how things went and perhaps would step in if the need arose to help them. Well, help most of them, since one member wasn't on Harry's nice list at the moment. Still, the Patil family had shown themselves to be competent and skilled in a variety of areas, though he wondered if either of the twins inherited Parseltongue as a trait, since it was far more common in India than anywhere else in the world, and he knew at least two Patil members possessed the trait at one point in time. Kevin and Twizel was a Muggle-born, so Harry didn't have any information on him. Thus, he'd be in the observed column until Kevin gave Harry a better read on what kind of person he was, or Harry could dig into his family a bit more. Mandy Brocklehurst was a half-blood from a newer blood family. They were descended from a Muggle-born that was, shall we say, very interested in cutting all ties with their Muggle family. The descendants got along all right with other Muggles, but never tried to find or contact the original Muggle family members. They seemed to excel at handling magical creatures, so Harry would see in 2 years if Mandy was following her family legacy or starting something of her own. Sully was a half-blood from a lesser family. They weren't quite to noble status, but they weren't new blood either. Well, they were new to Britain, but they could trace their roots back a couple hundred years elsewhere. Apparently, her great-grandfather had come to Britain with her great-grandmother after his family cast him out for marrying a non-pure blood. The reason she was a half-blood was because her grandfather married a Muggle and her father had married a Muggle-born. Thus, Sue didn't have two sets of magical grandparents to elevate her. Not that she or her direct family cared, though what her extended magical family thought was unknown at the moment. Anyway, the Leaf family was a business venture family, and working to get their hands into various industries and businesses to prop them up higher while working to get their own innovations out when possible. Scott Ankrum was a muggle-born and seemed like a quiet type of boy. Harry wouldn't be able to judge him much, though like all the other muggle-borns around, Harry would likely look into his family for any red flags or persons of interest in one form or another. Lisa Turpin was a half-blood from a respected light-aligned family. The Turpins had been producing healers and cure masters for generations, though not every member took up those fields. They still learned healing and other arts associated as part of their family legacy, but that wasn't always the focus. The Turpins of old were also feared to be faced, since those that knew how to heal and repair damage also knew how to inflict it in the most painful of ways and keep you alive to suffer more. Stephen Cornfoot was a pureblood and seemed to be with the running theme of coming from a neutral family. Not too surprising, since the Cornfoot started out as corn farmers after the crop was introduced to the UK. They then built up their wealth and talent little by little until they essentially had the entire corn industry for the Isles, both muggle and magical, under their control. Harry was willing to bet that Stephen would be, at the very least, competent when herbology started, since he likely was around plants, and the like since he could walk. Last was Morag McDougal of the McDougal family, obviously, and a pureblood. The McDougal family was gray with a bit of dark in the standing of things, as they weren't favoring either side in the war, but they weren't afraid to make things bloody and violent for anyone who crossed them either, which included using the dark arts. From what Harry knew, her grandfather had members of the family join the Aurors and the Death Eaters to give him eyes and ears in both sides to use as he needed, while working to add to the family's knowledge from the alliances made. It worked, though he lost the family members that were Death Eaters in the war, and all but 2 of the Aurors. He didn't get any into Dumbledore's little club, but that was fine, since the other 2 provided more info and opportunities. Anyway, all in all, they weren't bad connections to make, but other than Anthony and Padma, none had any real spark that made Harry take a more active interest in them. He'd still be friendly and make connections with them, so long as they weren't assholes or little shits, but he'd not go out of his way to make connections. Although he suspected that may come anyway when schoolwork started, since he'd likely get drawn into helping people at times. "Where were you guys?" Hermione asked, breaking Harry from his thoughts. "We get up early to do exercises and some light training while Dell draws or reads before we go back and clean up for the day," Jacob informed as he began eating. "Why?" Terry asked, looking to them only for Harry and Jacob to lift their shirts, showing they both had a six-pack of abs, making a few of the girls blush. "It's also good to be physically fit to match your magic. There's quite a few spells that can't be blocked or stopped, so you have to dodge physically. Doing so is much easier if you're fit. Plus, personally, I do it to help my figure in the future, since my body will burn fat, but let me keep any curves I get in the future." Evie informed and sent a wink at Harry, who snorted and kept eating. A few girls looked contemplative at that, looking at their own bodies in consideration. "Can't you use magic for that?" one boy asked, making Evie snort. "Why use magic to look good when you can naturally? Plus, someone could undo the spells and ruin it. There's also the fact that if I look good and desirable without magic, imagine what I could look like if I used magic." Evie stated, making the boy nod his head, while several people, male and female, began considering that point. Any further comments were cut off by the sound of wings, making people look as a raven flew in and landed on Harry's shoulder before affectionately nipping at his ear. "Hello, girl, good flight?" Harry greeted, stroking the bird, causing it to trill happily. "Hello, Arella," Delphi greeted as Jacob and Evie waved, and the now named Arella nodded at them. "You have a raven?" Daphne asked as she blinked at him. "Yes, she's a familiar," Harry stated casually as he kept eating. "What's a familiar?" Hermione asked curiously. "A familiar is an animal that is bonded to a witch or wizard through their magic. They are beyond mere pets, as they form a bond with the person in question, and that bond can be as simple as having a permanent ally, or going further to allow communication, or even adopted traits from the animal. It is also possible to have more than one familiar, though that can vary on a number of things as to how many a person will have or get, though multiples is usually a sign of a powerful individual. Harry explained, making Hermione blink. Can anyone have a familiar? She asked, and Harry nodded. Yes, though many don't find their familiar. But that is mostly due to the fact that magic folk don't spend a lot of time around animals to possibly make the connection to them. Harry informed, making her nod as they kept eating. Hello, everyone. A voice called, making all, but Harry looked to see Flitwick coming by and passing out timetables to everyone. Hello, Professor. Harry stated calmly as he looked to the man, who nodded cordially. Lord Potter, I'm glad to see you decided to attend Hogwarts after all. Flitwick greeted as Harry nodded towards him, both ignoring the shocked looks from the other Ravenclaws at Harry, being a lord. I figured if nothing else, I could network while I was here. Harry explained, making Flitwick smirk and nod. Very Slytherin of you, Lord Potter. I look forward to seeing you in class. Flitwick commented before he continued handing out timetables. You're a lord? Cho blurted out in shock as Harry nodded and kept eating while holding his hand up, showing his ring. Why didn't you say anything? A girl sitting next to Cho exclaimed. You weren't observant enough to notice me wearing a lord's ring on my finger. Not my fault if you can't take time to observe someone you don't know to see if they're worth paying attention to. Harry stated as he kept eating while giving Arella some food as well. He's right. As Ravenclaws, I'd think you'd be more observant of people and things, so you could gather evidence before then forming theories and conclusions. Jacob stated, making a few of the older years grumble in annoyance. But how are you a lord? Aren't you too young? Cho asked, and Harry finished chewing. Don't worry. How I'm a lord will come out within the next couple of weeks, since I'm sure Dumbledore will try and do something at the Wizengamot to make me have to attend and prove my claims. Harry stated, knowing that dumbass would try something. Fortunately, he had contacts in the ministry that would ensure he was appraised of things should something come up. Do you not like the headmaster? Hermione asked, and Harry shook his head. Nope. And for the record, no, I don't want to talk about why right now. Let's just say that he is forever going to be on my shit list. Harry stated, using a tone that made it clear that he wanted the subject to be changed. So, do you have a subject you're looking forward to? Isabella offered since it was clear Harry didn't want to talk about it. Potions or charms for me. Daphne stated, going along with her friend in changing the subject. Charms or transfiguration. Tracy added, Dada for me, though the current professor leaves much to be desired. Jacob voiced as Harry had informed him he'd be a stuttering mess that would be doing more theory than anything. Charms or potions. Evie stated simply, I'm not sure yet. They all sound interesting to me. Hermione answered since, as a Muggle-born, this was all new to her. Potions or data. Delphi stated, knowing those were the two subjects that held her interest the most. None of them. Harry answered, making those that weren't close to him look at him in surprise. What? Why? Daphne voiced everyone's thoughts. Because it is highly unlikely I'll gain anything from them beyond killing time and making connections with other students and possibly the professors. Harry answered calmly as he kept eating. Isn't that a bit arrogant on your part? Daphne asked, causing Jacob, Evie, and Delphi to all snort. Hardly. If anything, it's a fact. Jacob commented as he grabbed some more food. It's true. Harry's a prodigy and genius if there ever was one. Just wait till we're in lessons and you'll see. Evie agreed as Delphi nodded, making them all look at Harry in curiosity. Eventually, they finished their breakfast and headed for their first class, which was Transfiguration. The group entered the room and took seats, not at the front, but not at the very back either. As they sat, Harry looked at the cat on the desk and smirked before nodding to her in greeting, causing the cat's eyes to widen momentarily before it gave a subtle nod in return. The cat was further surprised when Jacob, Delphi, and Evie nodded towards it as well after gazing at it for a long moment. It wasn't long before the rest of their year mates came in, which wasn't surprising since this was the first batch of Hogwarts students to be under 50 in number in over 200 years. It was further proof of just how big a toll both Wizarding Wars had taken on the magical population. The point was, with so few number of students, they could all fit into one classroom and thus didn't need to be divided, which was a bit easier on the teachers since they could devote more time to the higher year students, especially the OWL and Newt students since they'd need the extra help for their exams. Harry then took a moment to look at the other year mates starting with Slytherin, mainly because they were likely to be his biggest headaches. Theodore now was a part of a dark family, one of Voldemort's biggest supporters after Malfoy and the Lestranges. Not Senior was always looking for a way to advance his family in Voldemort's eyes, even trying to sell his wife, daughters, and son for anything the dark wanker could want or need. It didn't work really. Not was too blunt and brash. He was useful for raids and combat, but not for subtlety, manipulation, and alliance building, which Lucius Malfoy excelled at and wasn't half bad in a fight either. The fact he had married Narcissa Black also helped elevate him, as it helped further bring the Black family to Voldemort's side. Anyway, Theo seemed an all-right sort. He mainly cared about protecting his mother and sisters from his father, and ensuring he couldn't sell them off to anyone willing to offer not something he wanted. An easy ally to pick up with the right moves and handling of the situation. Millicent Bulstrode was a half-blood of the Bulstrode family. They were a minor family who built up their connection through marriage to other families. Millicent was a distant relative of Harry's due to Millicent's ancestor Violetta marrying into the Black family and then giving birth to Harry's great-great-grandmother Doria Potter née Black. It also meant she was related to quite a few of the Slytherin families, which was likely why she wouldn't be targeted by the elitist members, which shouldn't count Draco, since the Malfoys actually accepted half-bloods due to the fact that their children would give more purebloods. Plus, the intelligent families realized that if Dumbledore, a half-blood, was as powerful, strong, and capable as he was, what reason was there that other half-bloods couldn't be? Severus Snape was another example for half-bloods, as he was the youngest potions master in Europe's history, coming in second in the world's history, as there was a literal prodigy some 150 years ago that attained master rank of potions when they were 14. Said person was also the inventor/creator of quite a few potions still being used today, and had reworked methods and created new ones to harvest and use ingredients, as well as standardizing potion making leading to current standards. It was still fair to Snape, as that was a once-in-20 lifetimes individual, and even he had to admit it was astounding and extraordinary beyond what he was capable of. A third example, though not many would know, would be Voldemort, aka Tom Riddle. A thirst for power and magic made him a force to be reckoned with, his little death cheats notwithstanding. And with a few hundred followers, he brought the magical community of the Isles to its knees and had the rest of Europe ready to basically full-on assault Britain if things escalated even further. Harry hated the bastard, but he could still respect the power and capabilities he showed. Back to the point though, Millicent was in the maybe column since she was family. He just hoped she wasn't going to be a problem that had to be removed violently. Blaise Zabini was of Italian descent, and his family could be traced back to Rome at its height within Italy. His grandfather, Angelo, was a right cunt, and calling him strict would be a massive understatement to the man. No one wanted to go against the man. Not even a minster of Italy was willing to do so. It didn't help that the man was smart enough to see the value of the Muggle world, and had quite a few families under his control/employ, especially those from Sicily and Calabria. The man utilized Muggle weaponry, criminals, and ingenuity as well as operations to a height that many wizards would never think to. Russia was an exception, as their mafia was closely tied to their magical community, just as it was to the Muggle government. The Bratva being started by a half-blood and then gaining so much momentum within a decade was no coincidence either. Anyway, Blaise would make a good ally to have, though Harry would have to keep an eye on Angelo, since the man was shrewd and cunning as he was brutal and sadistic. There was the upside that Harry could gain quite a bit of favor with multiple people if he decided to take the old asshole out at some point. But that was food for later, since he didn't need to be plotting murder/assassination on his first day at Hogwarts. He could wait for the weekend and do that. Next up was Gregory Goyle. He wasn't the most intelligent person, but his family was skilled and handy in a fight, usually relying on their brute strength that was impressive, even if it wasn't as good as a bruiser's. His father was definitely cruel enough to be a Death Eater, and was only spared prison because Lucius Malfoy wanted to keep him and Lord Crabbe around to continue serving as his lackeys and yes-men. Gregory only did what he was told, since his father would use the Cruciatus curse on him if he disobeyed or failed him in some manner. Still, the boy could be useful and helpful if he was properly motivated and educated. Vincent Crabbe was pretty much a twin, in upbringing and status anyway, of Goyle, just with no relation except some 150 years back. However, That meant he was of the same possibilities as Goyle. It was just their fathers that stood in the way of things primarily. Pansy Parkinson was from another dark family, though fully cementing them as dark was a bit harder to do since they really just allied with darker families rather than did shit themselves to be. Labeled dark, meaning guilty by association. She was a bit of a fangirl for Draco, but whether that was because it was expected of her or because she actually fancied him was unknown at the moment. No doubt his money and influence was affecting her desire for him. Still, it didn't mean she couldn't be swayed to new allegiance if the right incentive was offered. Draco Malfoy, heir of the Malfoy family and Isabella's older brother. Also, a spoiled brat who may or may not have had his money stolen from him by Harry when they were at the train station. Anyway, it was well known that he was an idiot and bigoted without any shame, constantly using his father's name and political power to intimidate people rather than build up his own power base. It didn't help his ego that Severus Snape, the potions teacher and head of Slytherin House, was his godfather, making him even more wise and arrogant. He'd be the boss of Slytherin because of his father's influence, but once that eventually dried up, he'd be nothing and no one would help or stand with him when shit hit the fan eventually. Draco was the only confirmed annoyance at the moment, but the others could be unless Harry found a way to get them to his side of things. Next were the Hufflepuffs, with one headache among them at the moment. Zachariah Smith was that headache. The Smith family were already strutting around like peas at times thanks to one Hepzibah Smith ranting and raving about her family being descendants of Helga Hufflepuff and supposedly being able to prove it thanks to possessing her cup/goblet, which was lost at the time of Hepzibah's death. The idiocy was not lost on any educated wizard, since having an artifact of a house did not mean you were heirs to the house, or there'd be a lot more chaos in proving who rightful heirs were. Anyway, Zacharias and his immediate family had been the most annoying and vocal about the lineage and were causing a lot of headaches and problems for people because of their constant bitching and shouting and spouting. If they were biased towards Muggles or Muggleborns, they'd be considered relatives of the Malfoys and other pureblood families. Regardless, Zacharias was going to be a headache for Harry, especially if some plans came to fruition, but he'd deal with him later when it became unbearable or the idiot crossed the line. Sally Smith was Zacharias' cousin and, while not as pleasant as she could be, was still much better than Zacharias. While her direct family weren't spouting and fighting that they were descendants as much or as loudly as Zacharias, they weren't turning down the notion or trying to get the others to quiet down either. Harry could also give her due credit that she had more magical power than Zacharias, which wasn't saying all that much, and it seemed she was sending apologetic looks throughout dinner and breakfast whenever the idiot was spouting off about shit. She was a maybe, but not a terribly likely one given her family, still until he was certain Harry wouldn't write her off as a lost cause yet. Megan Jones was another potential ally with good connections. Her family was known politically and had some wealth to it, but her older sister was a ministry worker who also helped at St. Mungo's, and her cousin recently became captain of the Welsh all-female Quidditch team, the Holy Head Harpies. The Jones were a light-attuned family, though they weren't as big of Dumbledore supporters as others were, but they didn't antagonize or ostracize him either. Likely to not be branded dark for daring to disagree or go against. Leader of the Light and greatest light wizard of all time, Albus. Multi-middle name, Dumbledore. Still, they weren't afraid to fight when necessary and knew how to hurt those who tried to hurt them. Good people to have as friends and allies when it came time to fight, regardless of the arena the fight took place in. Ernie Macmillan was one of the higher chance possible for getting an ally. Firstly, because the Macmillans and Potters had been friendly and unofficial allies for years. Secondly, they were related through marriages, as Ernie's great-aunt Melania was Sirius and Regulus Black's grandmother. Thirdly, the Macmillans were known for being a light family, but not afraid to put enemies in the ground when it came time for it. Fourthly, they were one of the few families constantly making inquiries about where Harry was and if he was safe and well cared for. So, unless Ernie was a royal asshole and bitch, there was no reason Harry and he couldn't be friends as time went on and possibly allies in the future. If that included his older sister, Pippa, who was working as a potions assistant in Diagon Alley, then all the better. Justin Finch Fletchley was a Muggle-born, though unlike the others, he knew of the Fletchley family. Harry didn't know which member was Justin's father, but he'd keep an eye on him in the future until he found out. Then he may need to take action depending on how things played out from there. The Fletchleys had been a prominent Peaky Blinder family at one point, and while not as in your face about their activities nowadays, they weren't exactly honest folk either. Justin being a wizard would catch a lot of attention from them, making them want to try and use him and magic to their advantage in every way possible. Such a thing was dangerous on multiple levels, and as such, Harry would keep an eye on him and have some of his contacts watch the Fletchleys a bit more. Next on the list was Wayne Hopkins, who had a cousin join Gryffindor, and who was a half-blood. Harry knew that his mother was a witch from a very minor house, so no real pull there. But still, Harry wouldn't disregard him unless he was an asshole or an idiot. Anything else, and he could work with. Hannah Abbott of the Abbott family, and a half-blood. She seemed all right on the train, though a bit skittish and nervous, and came from a long line of magical beings. This was evidenced by the fact one of her ancestors was buried in Godric's Hollow, a place that only magicals had lived since the Statute of Secrecy was put into effect. Part of her insecurities may stem from the fact she was sorted into a house that had several portraits of her ancestor, Gifford Abbott, who was not only a highly gifted wizard, but also became headmaster of Hogwarts for a time. Still, if she could get some confidence and learn to relax, Harry had little doubt she'd be a strong and capable witch. Lastly was Susan Bones of the Bones family. The Bones had a long line of talented and powerful witches and wizards that had some position of authority in the ministry and were considered light despite the fact that they'd gladly kill enemies and criminals if the need arose. They at one point were strong supporters of Dumbledore, but that changed when Voldemort just happened to find and personally kill Susan's mother, father, uncle, one aunt, and all three of her cousins. Amelia Bones, Susan's remaining aunt and current head of the DMLE, broke ties with Dumbledore after that and pushed for the Aurors to all ignore his petitioning to not use lethal methods against the Death Eaters. The reason for this was because it happened shortly after Susan's uncle Edgar, Susan's father Maurice, and Edgar's eldest son Nico began having massive disagreements with Dumbledore over what their little Order of the Phoenix was doing to combat Voldemort and the Death Eaters. In fact, Edgar and his family were killed shortly after he sent word to Amelia that he was going to provide evidence of Dumbledore's illegal activities in order to possibly get the Order to work with the DMLE instead of without them. It didn't take a genius to connect the dots, but there was nothing that could be proven, and Amelia wasn't stupid enough to go to a court of Dumbledore supporters and try to push her own weight against his. So, she settled for undermining him any way she could, both obvious and covertly, while taking time to raise Susan herself after all the shit that happened. The woman's greatest fear was that she'd die and leave Susan alone, both without family, and to be the one solely responsible for continuing their family legacy. Such a burden on a girl who'd rather heal and care for others than fight viciously was not something she wanted to see happen. Regardless, Susan had a lot of potential to be great. Regardless of the field she focused in, she just needed more confidence and maybe some people to help support her, so she knew she wasn't alone. It had worked for Harry, though it wasn't in the conventional sense due to some things that happened. But still, if Harry of all people could move past the shit in his life and strive to be better than anyone could, except perhaps those like Voldemort and Dumbledore that were far too ingrained in their ways to ever stop. Right now, he only had a moderate connection to Susan and Hannah, but hopefully that could be worked on with time. Finally, were the Gryffindors, either his biggest fans or his biggest annoyances or possibly both, or maybe there'd be some surprises among them. Dean Thomas was a half-blood son of a wizard, Leo Thomas, and a Muggle woman. Though, from what Harry learned, Dean didn't know his father was a wizard, nor that he had died standing up to death. Eaters that came to recruit him shortly after Dean was born after he left him and his mother to hide them from the Death Eaters. Harry wasn't sure on Dean yet. His Muggle relatives would still be checked out by his contacts, but the boy seemed an okay sort and was listed in the maybe category for allies. Lavender Brown came from a family known for their healers and curse breakers, though they occasionally got a squib in the family who would go to the Muggle world for work. Harry believed one of Lavender's cousins was in Muggle school and seemed to take a shine to rugby. His name was Kelly Brown. Anyway, Lavender's family was another neutral family, which was natural for healers and curse breakers since they didn't really focus on one person over another when they did their job, and didn't have a strong political or financial presence in the world. Still, The Browns were known to people, they just weren't as famous as some of the houses with political standing. Seamus Finnegan was another half-blood with a Muggle father. His mother was from a minor family that had a series of pubs around Ireland that basically functioned the same as the Leaky Cauldron, providing room and board for magic folk, while also giving access to magical communities. There wasn't much talk about their magical talents other than a few who had a penchant for causing explosions in a variety of ways. Parvati Patil was essentially the same as her sister. And no, that's not being offensive. It was just accurate until Harry interacted with both enough to see and understand the differences. Their magical power was equal. Their upbringing should have been equal. Their knowledge was debatable as one could be more studious than the other, and one could have inherited a trait that the other didn't, but those wouldn't become known to Harry unless he either read their minds or learn more about them through interacting with them. Carl Hopkins was in the same category as his cousin, as it was going to take some investigating on his part to see if he was helpful or capable in ways. Eloise Midgen was a pureblood from a non-ranked family, new blood to the scene basically, and from what Harry found, her family hadn't shown anything impressive yet. They had a couple clothing businesses and some investments, but nothing really standing out / noticeable all things considered. Again, didn't mean he'd discount her, but he hoped she'd get a bit more interesting as time went on. Faye Dunbar was a half-blood from another new-blooded family, though they were older than the Midgens, and it seemed her family had a penchant for joining the Aurors, though none as of yet had reached head Auror or higher. Her magical level was slightly above average, which wasn't much but still better than several others. She was also in the maybe category. Neville Longbottom was easily the most likely Gryffindor for Harry to befriend and ally with since their families had been allied for years, and he and Harry were godbrothers. He'd have to get in touch with both Neville and Augusta Longbottom, Neville's gran, and discuss things with them since he had a very easy, but also very important, way to sweeten the deal of reaffirming the alliance between them. Neville, like Susan, needed some confidence built up, no doubt from Augusta being very strict and hard on Neville, both to live up to his parents' legacy and to ensure he could survive if something happened to her since she was getting on in years, and quite a few assholes would see her as an easy target, which sadly was becoming more and more the case as the years rolled on. Harry did frown at the sight of Neville's wand and wondered if Augusta had lost her mind for a time when she gave Neville his father's wand instead of getting him one that matched him. Harry could understand giving him that wand to train and practice with at home, since it wouldn't have the trace on it, and she could give him practical lessons, but to send him to Hogwarts with it? A place he needed an attuned wand to help him with work and practice? Harry supposed she was just adamant that if the wand was good for Frank, then it must be good for Neville, without even thinking of the fact that the wand chooses the wizard, not the other way around. Harry would bring it up quietly with him and McGonagall, no reason to possibly embarrass the guy by making it known he came to Hogwarts with an improper wand. Plus, it was early enough that no one would likely notice a difference, and if they did, Neville could play it off as it was a wand he had reacted to when he was younger, but now it wasn't as suited for him. Finally came Ron Weasley, the youngest male of the Weasley family, and already Harry knew he was an attention-seeking prat. It could be due to getting nothing himself, just his brother's hand-me-downs, and them all getting recognized in some manner while he wasn't. But the boy didn't understand that they worked for their recognition. They didn't just waltz into Hogwarts and get their reputations without doing anything. His table manners were also terrible, and his obvious biasness was annoying as much as Draco's prejudice. Draco over your blood status, and Ron over what house you were put into at Hogwarts. The idiot clearly forgot or didn't know that Merlin himself was a Slytherin while Morgan Le Fay was a Ravenclaw and Arthur Pendragon was a Hufflepuff. Houses didn't mean shit for whether you'd be a villain, hero, or whatever. The main reason Harry was so focused on Ron at the moment was because he wasn't there. Everyone else from their year was in class except for him, meaning he likely wasn't paying attention and was eating, or he decided to not follow the group and went off on his own or some other shit. Oh well, it wasn't Harry's problem. He took his seat and set his bag on the table as Delphi sat on his right. Jacob sat just behind him, and Evie sat just in front of him. Isabella ended up sitting on his left with Daphne, Tracy, and Hermione sitting on the other side of her. Ginny sat on the other side of Delphi, and the others of Ravenclaw sat around / with them. Jacob had gotten Neville to sit next to him and patted on the back to give him some encouragement before pulling his own stuff out. The others followed suit and began copying down the syllabus that was on the board while wondering where the teacher was. Harry merely sat back with his hands folded, waiting as he mentally counted down when the bell would ring, signifying class was to start. 2 seconds before the bell tolled, the door burst open as Ron Weasley entered, panting and gasping for breath. "Made it," he sighed on relief. "Barely, though you should be glad that the professor isn't here yet." Ginny scolded with a glare as Ron glared back. A snort from Harry, Delphi, Evie, and Jacob drew attention to them. "Something you want to add?" Zacharias asked with a frown. "Just that you're all clueless if you think the teacher hasn't been here the whole time," Evie stated with an amused smile. "What? What are you talking about?" Draco demanded as Evie smirked more, but it was Delphi who answered. "Transfiguration is the art of using magic to change the form of something into something else. However, one of the highest forms of transfiguration is the animagus transformation," Delphi stated, making a few of the smarter ones quickly catch on and look at the cat in shock. "What? Did I miss something?" Hermione asked in confusion. The animagus transformation is the process that allows a witch or wizard to change into an animal at will, usually with some benefits added and depending on what the animal is. Jacob explained as Hermione frowned before widening her eyes as she looked at the cat along with everyone else before it jumped off the desk and changed into McGonagall. "That will be 30 points to Ravenclaw, Mr. Potter, for being the first student in over 50 years to figure out I was the cat the entire time," McGonagall stated as Harry nodded at her. "Now, Mr. Weasley, perhaps you'd like to take your seat, so we can actually begin since it seems you decided to wait till the last moment to join us," McGonagall added, making Ron turn red in embarrassment before he took his seat. "Now, I will begin with the basics of transfiguration as well as the dangers. I expect you all to pay attention, as my sympathy well will be very dry should you choose to ignore or disregard my warnings." She began with a serious glare that would make most cower in fear of her. To Harry and his 3 friends, it was an okay glare, but not something to be overly worried about. McGonagall began her lecture on the hazards and dangers of transfiguration, such as turning a rock into food and then eating it only for the food to turn back into a rock later on and possibly kill them. A few half-bloods and purebloods noted that perhaps the desserts and sweets they ate at times may not have been those things and instead vegetables and other foods transfigured into junk food, so they'd eat them, though it still tasted good, so it wasn't a big deal. Eventually, the lecture ended and some practical work began, starting with turning a matchstick into a needle. Harry sat back and relaxed as he jotted down some notes, ideas, and items he wanted to try and improve and work on when he got the chance. He didn't pause when he felt McGonagall come near him and kept writing until she eventually cleared her throat. "Yes, ma'am," Harry asked as he looked up at the professor. "Mr. Potter, may I ask why you're not attempting the spell?" McGonagall asked as she stared at him, and a few students snickered at seeing him get in trouble. McGonagall looked at the son of her 2 favorite students in both interest and worry, fearing that he was either arrogant or just didn't want to participate. She was also mentally reminding herself that she'd have to properly address him as a lord if he asked or if matters escalated at any point. Harry merely waved his hand, turning the matchstick into a perfect silver needle. He then waved his hand again, and the needle suddenly split and duplicated into 4 with them each being the 4 houses' colors. He then waved again, and the needles floated in front of McGonagall, who could only gape in shock along with the class except for Jacob, Evie, and Delphi. "Is that sufficient, Professor?" Harry asked calmly as he looked at the woman. Mr. Potter, that is most impressive. To do wandless and silent casting at your age, but also to use the Gemino charm as well. It may not seem sufficient, but take 150 points for your work," McGonagall stated, trying to process her shock. "Thank you, Professor," Harry stated simply. "May I keep the needles?" McGonagall asked, and Harry nodded before he made them levitate to her, where she grabbed them and placed them in her robes. Harry smirked as she turned away before Jacob, Evie, and Delphi quickly did the same, though they used their wands and were verbal, but still got it first try, which earned them 25 points each. "How? Hermione asked as she stared at them in shock. Harry's been teaching us for years. This basic stuff isn't going to give us any problems. Jacob stated, indicating himself, Evie, and Delphi. Can you help us? Hermione asked, and they nodded. Of course, though don't waste it or Harry's time, or he may not help you anymore. Harry isn't fond of his time and effort being wasted because the person isn't taking things as seriously as him or isn't interested in doing things correctly or smartly. Evie stated, knowing her boss was serious about his teaching and wasn't going to help someone who wouldn't take it seriously too. Hermione and a few others nodded as Harry sat back. Focus and envision the match turning into a needle. Focus your intent and magic on making that reality. Each bit of change filling you with confidence, happiness, and a feeling of accomplishment. Even if it takes a few casts, just focus on working it into the needle and making it take the form. Harry instructed as those near him listened intently. Power, will, and intent. Those are the three key building blocks with magic. Too little of one, and the spell may work, but not as well as you'd like it to. For instance, if I was to use the knockback jinx on a rock and put the bare minimum into it, it would move a bit. However, if my desire was to send the rock hurtling as far away as possible, then I'd need to fill myself with that desire and intent, but also use far more power. Thankfully, magic responds to emotions and desire, hence accidental magic happening. And as such, your desires can fuel your magic to new heights. However, you have to be careful that your control doesn't suffer for power. Otherwise, instead of sending the rock flying, you could obliterate it instead. He continued, making them all pay rapt attention to him. Now, give it a go. Be confident you can do this. Harry added while giving a look to Neville, who hesitantly nodded before they began trying it. They didn't get it the first try, but the worst for those who listened to Harry was 4 attempts and the needles were near perfect, a slight imperfection in the eye or a dull tip, but still. McGonagall was actually smiling at the sight and awarded them all points, counting Harry for giving excellent instructions and helping those outside of his house. Eventually, class ended. While the others funneled out, Harry pulled Neville back and both approached McGonagall. Mr. Potter, is something wrong? She asked, and Harry shook his head. Nothing really, ma'am. Just thought it would be prudent to inform you that Mr. Longbottom here has a mismatched wand. Harry stated as he gestured to Neville, who ducked his head when McGonagall looked to him. Are you certain? McGonagall asked, and Harry nodded. Yes, his wand movement and incantation were perfect. He has to have sufficient magic or he'd not be accepted to Hogwarts, and his wand looked a bit aged and worn, meaning it has been used for a time. Harry explained, making McGonagall frown as she held her hand out, and Neville hesitantly handed his wand over. McGonagall inspected it a long moment before frowning. I believe this is your father's wand, Mr. Longbottom. Did you not go to Ollivander's to get one for yourself? She asked, and Neville looked down. It's all right, mate. You're not in trouble. Just answer her. Harry stated as he put a hand on his shoulder. Neville gulped and took a breath. And my gran thought the wand would be fine. I was good enough for my dad after all. Neville stated as McGonagall sighed. Mate, you're not your father. The wand chooses the wizard, and you're not the wizard it chose. You're not a copy of you, father. You're his son. You're you. He is himself. The wand knows that and knows you're not its chosen master. It's dangerous at times to use another's wand, as at any point the wand can just stop working or even cause a backlash from trying to use it. Here, Harry stated as he pulled out 15 galleons and put them into his hand. Buy a wand, holster, and kit at Hogsmeade or Diagon Alley if you need to. I'm sure the professor will be happy to either escort you or arrange someone to escort you to get a proper wand, which will improve your work and your spells a great deal. Harry stated as Neville stammered and McGonagall looked at him in surprise. Just take it, Neville. If it's an issue, then you can have your gran pay me back at a later date. Not that it matters to me much. I don't need the money. Plus, we're family, so we're supposed to help each other. Harry stated with a small smile. Oh, did your gran not tell you we're godbrothers? My mother was your godmother, and yours was mine. He revealed once he saw Neville's confused expression. Oh, really? Neville asked in surprise, and Harry nodded. Yup, so if you ever need anything, don't hesitate to ask. Same if you ever want to sit with me and my friends during one of the meals, I can formally introduce you to them. Harry stated with a smile. Now I'm going to leave you so that you and the professor can figure out things. See you in class, Neville. Harry added as he nodded to McGonagall and left the two. He wasn't surprised that Jacob, Evie, and Delphi waited by the door, nor that they fell in a step behind him as he walked. Already making a move to ally with Longbottom. I see. Evie stated as Harry hummed. Their families have been allies for a long time. No real surprise that he'd moved to keep it going. Delphi stated as they walked. Especially when you consider the Longbottoms have influence and money to back them up, so not bad allies to have, and if Neville is either a fighter or healer, all the better in the long run. Evie stated knowing that the benefits were being weighed against wanting to continue tradition. There's also the cons to consider, such as the assholes targeting Neville and his family, Neville potentially not supporting my plans and decisions, his grand possibly being a bitch and annoyance, Neville spilling some secrets to others, Neville being targeted to spill secrets, and a few others. However, I need a stronger foundation in the wizarding world to get things moving, and right now the Longbottoms are the best starting point since I have a starting point for them and my incentives to add and will only add to that point. Harry added, making them nod as they continued to class, knowing that McGonagall would give Neville a note for his tardiness if he couldn't make it in time. Upon reaching the next classroom, which was Charms, the quartet stopped and frowned at the sight before them. Said sight was Crabbe, Goyle, and Parkinson keeping Daphne, Tracy, and Hermione away while Draco had his sister pinned to a wall and was currently shouting at her. They weren't really listening to what the idiot was saying, but they caught the gist of it. Basically, he was pissed she dared to not go to Slytherin and was hanging out with a mudblood. Harry merely sighed and walked forward, trying hard not to glare or scowl at the other students for just standing there doing nothing. While this was happening, counting the other Ravenclaws, before he pushed past the girls and looked at Crabbe and Goyle. Move! He ordered while gazing at them intently, and the two glanced at each other before shaking their heads. All right then, Harry stated before he grabbed their heads and slammed them together, dropping them to the floor and getting gasps from the other students as Draco turned to see what was happening. Only, when he did, he found a hand around his throat before he was slammed into the wall next to his sister and looked into the practically glowing emerald eyes of Harry. Parkinson moved to help Draco, only to find a grip on her hair from Evie before her legs were kicked out and she dropped to her knees while Evie held her there. Let's make something perfectly clear here, Draco. Isabella may be your sister, but she's also a member of my house, which means you mess with her, you mess with me, and I play for keeps. Harry stated, and then surprised everyone when he actually lifted Draco off the floor while keeping him pinned to the wall. Now, you may think you can waltz around school because your daddy has money and influence and because Professor Snape is your godfather, but let me tell you something. It doesn't mean shit. I could cause you to fall down a flight of stairs and break your neck, or put you in a coma, and your father and Snape could do nothing to stop it, and I'd mask my tracks, so while not even Dumbledore invading my mind for a week straight would uncover anything. I know you're not the smartest person, so let me be plain. Stay away from her and never use that word in front of me in that context again, or I will, I promise, ensure you're in the hospital wing for a long time. Harry stated before he tossed him onto the floor, and Evie pushed Parkinson over. How dare you? My father will hear about this, Potter. Draco shouted as Harry looked at him unimpressed while a few were shaking their heads, counting a couple older years passing by. Harry had just made it clear that his father couldn't do shit if Harry pulled something later on, and now he's spouting off like a child and idiot. Oh, well, Malfoy, how about a duel between us? Flitwick will be here soon, and he's a former dueling champion, so he can monitor it and be judge, and I'm sure he'll happily make a vow to rule fairly in it. Harry offered with a smirk as his three friends held back grins. Fine, Goyle shall be my second, Malfoy stated while Jacob, Evie, and Delphi snickered. He needs a second. How adorable. Jacob stated while trying not to laugh, and Malfoy turned red. Now, Jacob, just because he's inept, untalented, or not confident that he can handle a duel doesn't mean we should mock him. That can come after he loses. Harry stated as he looked at Malfoy. Morning, everyone. Flitwick stated as he arrived and ushered everyone inside before any further comments could be made. Ah, Professor, Mr. Malfoy has just accepted a dueling challenge from me. Would you be willing to be the judge for it? Harry asked as Flitwick raised an eyebrow before considering it. Hmm, very well, but no spells that intentionally are lethal. Flitwick stated, making Harry shrug while Draco nodded. The two moved to the area between the seating areas and faced each other. Malfoy then drew his wand and aimed it at Harry, ready to launch a spell, only for Harry to quickly slap his wand away from him. Whenever you're ready, Harry stated with a yawn as his friend smirked, and everyone stared in surprise, mostly because it never occurred to them that the wand could be physically removed without magic. Malfoy turned red and grabbed his wand, prepared to fire again, only to get his wand slapped away again. Take your time, I'm sure. Professor Flitwick wants to start the class next week, Harry stated, sounding bored, and then slapped the wand away a third time, and this time slapped Malfoy across the face as well. This is getting a bit redundant, Malfoy, he added before he grabbed Draco's wrist and twisted it, making him drop his wand before Harry shoved him over. Are we done with the warm-up? I'd like to start the duel this millennium. He yawned as his friends laughed. What the hell are you doing? Draco demanded as he glared at Harry, not noticing that a few of the purebloods and half-bloods were looking at him like he was an idiot. I'm waiting for the duel to begin. What are you doing? Harry responded calmly. What are you on about? Draco questioned, not seeing that even Flitwick now saw the point that Harry was making. You don't know? Harry asked with a head tilt before looking to his friends. Hear that? The pure-blooded son of House Malfoy and member of House Black doesn't know. Isn't that sad? He added as they nodded. Too true, but perhaps they hoped he'd learn through self-study and improvement rather than them making him learn. Evie offered as Harry nodded. Possibly. Oh well, I guess I'll educate the uneducated. Harry responded before turning to Draco. Now, Draco, since you're clearly unfamiliar with etiquette and dueling procedure, I'll tell you. A formal duel doesn't begin until the combatants have established rules, guidelines, any wagers, stipulations, and the like. Plus, we've not done a proper salute and bow as one is expected to in order to begin the duel. Otherwise, we're merely brawling like a couple of muggles, instead of proper wizards and witches determined to bring respect and honor to our families and houses. Harry revealed, making many start to murmur and nod while the Slytherins were looking at Draco, now understanding that he was resorting to just attacking rather than following proper etiquette and procedure for a proper duel. Something that no proper and respectable pureblood would do. Meaning Draco just brought a great deal of scrutiny and shame on himself, his family house, and on Slytherin for acting in such a way, especially when word got out to the other years. Especially since a half-blood was the one to point it out. Draco, very red from anger and embarrassment, seethed, "Fine. Standard dueling rules." He snarled, and Harry shrugged. "If you're sure that won't be too complicated for you," Harry replied, with a shrug as the two faced each other and gave a salute with their wands. Scared, Potter? Draco spat as Harry rolled his eyes. Of your skill with a wand? No. Of your breath? Yes. Harry replied, making a few stifle laughter as Draco scowled before the two turned and walked 10 paces from each other before they faced each other and gave a light bow. Draco turned and had his body positioned like he was holding a sword rather than a wand, while Harry merely stood there, his wand in his right hand while his left was in his pocket, and he had his head tilted to the right with his eyes closed. Draco waited, getting more and more annoyed as it seemed Potter wasn't taking this seriously, before he launched a flipendo at Harry. Harry didn't move as the Jinx approached him before he merely tilted his head to the other side, letting the Jinx sail past him. Draco just looked at him in shock before he quickly fired 5 more only for the same result as Harry leaned out of the way without moving his feet. That's slow, Harry stated, simply causing Draco to growl while Flitwick absently nodded, knowing it was indeed slow, but Malfoy was a first year, so it was understandable. Draco snarled and began firing all of the spells he could think of. Harry merely pointed his wand forward, and the spells hit a shield and were stopped, shocking everyone watching, except Harry's friends, naturally, as Harry tilted his head again. Force! Harry intoned as Draco prepared to dodge or block the spell, only to suddenly slam into the floor as he felt an unrelenting pressure crash down upon him. He grit his teeth as he tried to move, but the pressure was too strong that he couldn't even twitch. Harry then waved his hand, and the wood of the floor rose and encapsulated Draco's hands before Draco's wand flew to Harry's hand. No one said anything as they just stated in shock, awe, and fear as Jacob, Evie, and Delphi were all smirking. "I believe that I've won, Professor," Harry stated, breaking many from their daze as Flitwick coughed and nodded. "Indeed, Mr. Potter, I believe this is a clear victory for you," Flitwick called as Harry's trio began clapping, triggering others to do the same, counting Neville, who came in just before the duel started. Harry nodded and removed his spells, allowing Draco to groan as he got up, and Harry tossed his wand at his feet before moving to take his seat with his friends. "Do you need to go to the hospital wing, Mr. Malfoy?" Flitwick asked, not sure what that spell Harry used was and thus didn't know how badly Malfoy was hurt, if at all. "I'm fine," Draco growled as he moved to sit down, though it was clear he was hurt in some fashion from how slow he was moving. "Well, class, I hope that duel was entertaining for you. Now, we shall begin the lesson," Flitwick stated as he took his spot atop some books at a podium before he took roll to ensure everyone was present. The class began with an introduction to charms and how even the simplest spells could be effective in a variety of ways, counting dueling. Eventually, the lesson went to teaching the Lumos spell, a simple spell that made a light emit from your wand. Harry sat back and let the others try, a few getting it easily and some having a little difficulty since they were trying to force it rather than just letting the magic flow. Even if it was one of the simplest spells in the world to do, if you weren't using magic properly, then you'd have difficulties. Harry then caught Flitwick looking at him before motioning his hand to try. Harry shrugged before he pointed his wand up, and several balls of light left the tip and began floating around the room in different colors. "Well done, Mr. Potter. Take 30 points for Ravenclaw," Flitwick stated with a smile. "Now, class, you'll notice that Mr. Potter not only released the Lumos spell from his wand, but he also changed the color of it and even made multiples. Such a thing is possible. Though in a duel you'll want to stick with brighter colors to potentially distract and blind your opponents rather than darker colors that will merely draw a bit of attention." Flitwick informed as Harry had the balls burst into a shower of sparkles as he lowered his wand. The class just looked at Harry in amazement before he began helping those near him with their work. Once class had finished, Flitwick asked Harry to stay back for a moment. "Mr. Potter, it is obvious that you're ahead of your classmates just based on your performance today. I will have you keep going at your current learning pace, and if you keep showing your talent, then I shall provide you with harder work. Is that acceptable?" Flitwick asked, and Harry nodded his head, though internally he wasn't 100% confident that Flitwick had anything to teach him that he needed to know. "Very well. Now I know it may seem invasive, but may I ask where you studied before here? If you do not wish to tell me, then I understand," Flitwick stated, and Harry shrugged. "I've had hundreds of teachers, sir, each building off of the last and adding what they could each time. They pulled no punches and wanted to ensure that the training stuck to where I can do some spells on instinct without even realizing I'm doing it," Harry stated as Flitwick widened his eyes before nodding. "Your teachers sound strict," he stated, and Harry nodded. "They were, but they were fair as well. That's all I intend to ask of you, sir. Be firm, but fair," Harry replied, and Flitwick nodded. "Very well. I shall do that. Go on and catch up with your friends. I have to prepare for the next class," Flitwick said, and Harry nodded to him before walking off. Harry merely hummed as he walked, not even blinking at Jacob, Evie, and Delphi falling in step behind him, or that the others of his house were waiting to talk to him along the way as well. As he walked and talked to his housemates, he idly thought about the day so far and found it met his expectations exactly as he thought it would. No surprises, shocks, or anything that he didn't account for. Even the duel with Malfoy went as he expected it to when the idiot couldn't help but blow up at his sister. Dumbledore hiding something in the castle was a bit of a surprise, but not too much of one that Harry couldn't adapt or think for it. If nothing else, he'd contact someone to look more into matters for him while he continued with his education, though it was more him going through the motions. Still, it was necessary, and Harry would continue to do it until one of a few specific things occurred. He idly wondered which one would happen first, but based on the probability of things, he assumed a Wisengamot meeting would soon be called, and he'd go from there. He could hardly wait to see Dumbledore's reaction when the time came. "Done," That's it for this chapter. Next chapter, we continue with classes, and some other things happen as well. Shout out to my patrons. Terminator 1738, Andrew Stevens, Kid Chaos, Shadow 9 Fox, Janice Christopher Saunderskov, Patrick Farrow, Smilix, Dylan Page, William Scondras, Tom Curry, Joseph, Hurt Fanfiction, Matthew Jackson, Yuri Listens, Corey Toller, Aisha, Knight, Dragging 213, William Kwok, Visible Colt 136, Blaze Storm 2, Basketballer 23, Jacob Hall, Shell 8888, Trent Rowe, Cole Hughes, Fire King 1999, Joshua Pounders, Aaron Walker, Rich Didcott, Alexander, Sin Hunter, St. Maximus, Colex Suneater, Bobo Eleben, Forgotten Crazy, Alucard 01, and God Phoenix 1. Thank you all for your continued support. See you all next time.